A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. It was the kind of day that drags, one of those afternoons where the sun seems to hang just a little too long in the sky, every tick of the clock echoing through the quiet of my small therapy office, where I usually found solace among my books and wobbly old chairs. After a morning filled with mundane cases, anxiety, a sprinkle of depression, the usual suspects, my final appointment came in the form of a new patient who, unknown to me at the time, would shake the very foundation of my moral compass. When he walked in, I wasn't prepared for the weight of his presence. He was stooped but imposing, a heaviness about him that seemed to suppress the air. He introduced himself as Victor, and I could tell from his accent that he was not from around here. I later learned he was from a war-torn country far removed from my well-insulated suburban existence. At first glance, he appeared like any patient, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of nightmares and shadows. He sat in the chair across from me, those haunted eyes narrowing even further when I caught a glimpse of the scars, physical and otherwise, etched into his skin. "You have to promise not to judge," he said, a quiver in his voice revealing a hint of vulnerability. "I'm not who you think I am." It was an invitation and a warning, as if reality were temporarily suspended, and I found myself leaning forward, curious. As the session unfolded, Victor let slip snippets of his life, recounting tales of violence and chaos that would make a horror movie pale in comparison. He spoke of choices, of battles fought not only against enemies but against his own conscience, and I was struck by the absurdity of it all. I was confiding in a war criminal, a man culpable of atrocities I read about in history books. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on me. What constitutes a person? Should I extend him the compassion I offered all my patients, or could he be irredeemable? As the weeks dragged on, I grew attached to Victor in ways I never anticipated. Each session grew increasingly intimate, laden with discussions of guilt, human nature, and the cyclical nature of violence. He was both a monster and a man seeking redemption. I began to find beauty in his tragic story, bewildered by how he reflected my own fears back at me. Maybe I wasn't just a therapist healing others but a fragile human being grasping for connection in a world teeming with horror. But one fateful afternoon, everything shifted. As he spoke of his past, of time spent wondering whose lives he had claimed in the name of war, a phone call interrupted our session. I instinctively picked up, only to hear a voice crackling on the other end. "We know who he is. He's a wanted man." My heart stammered. The confrontation of my unspoken fears had arrived at my doorstep. Shame surged through me for even allowing myself to feel sympathy for him. The line between right and wrong blurred starkly in that moment, and I widely opened my eyes, desperately searching for some illumination within Victor's steady gaze. "Do you know what you're doing?" I asked him, an accusatory whisper escaping my lips. To my shock, he smiled softly, an expression of understanding and serene acceptance. "I'm trying to come home," he replied, words heavy with implication. In that moment, I realized I had not just been his therapist but a kindred spirit. We sat in silence, a suffocating tension enveloping us as I battled with my professional duty against an unsettling sense of betrayal by my own empathy. When the session ended, my heart remained heavy, complicated, and confused. I didn't actually care. Who had he been before? The person who sat across from me was alive, vulnerable, and paradoxically engrossing. The lines we often draw based on societal norms began to dissolve like sugar in warm water, leaving me disoriented yet intrigued, just wishing for clarity that never arrived. Weeks passed, and I knew I was facing a crossroads. I had to decide, continue treating him and risk my own conscience, or sever ties altogether, never allowing the flicker of his humanity to shimmer in my mind again. In the end, I chose to continue our sessions, not because I believed he deserved forgiveness, but because, admittedly, I reveled in the complexity of his existence. I was learning about the human condition in its rawest form. The Psychiatric Association's guidelines, the law, my own moral compass, they all paled against the tapestry of human life I was slowly unraveling. I had not abandoned my ethics but instead had discovered a deeper narrative woven into Victor's story, one that transcended mere black and white thinking. I drifted further into this uncharted territory, committing myself to this man's journey toward redemption, even if it meant grappling with my own shadows along the way. For now, we would wade through the murky waters together, pieces of history intertwined, until clarity illuminated the darkness, if it ever would. Months later, I still found myself reflecting on that initial encounter, how I'd crossed paths with a war criminal who, while undeniably flawed, taught me a profound lesson in humanity. In the end, perhaps without the spark of madness that ignited this unlikely connection, healing could not have truly begun. As I continued my therapy practice, I found comfort in knowing that sometimes understanding rises from the ashes of the past, and the courage to face those shadows becomes a beautiful journey all on its own. As the months continued to unfold, I settled back into the rhythm of my therapy practice, letting the echoes of that initial encounter quiet down, but they never fully dissipated. The ember of our shared experience remained, quietly glowing in the recesses of my mind. My days were usually filled with the mundane yet gratifying tasks of helping others navigate their own turmoil, ordinary sessions punctuated by the lilting sounds of laughter or the occasional sob spilling forth beneath my watchful, empathetic gaze. However, I'd be lying if I said I didn't occasionally grapple with the strange weight of what I learned from my time with him, the man who carried remnants of war upon his shoulders, whose very name echoed like thunder in the stillness of moral conversation. We had exchanged stories that clung to the air between us, tough tales mottled with blood, but juxtaposed by his stark vulnerability. There was a surreal paradox in the way he navigated his undying guilt, the burden of lives lost and the iron chains of memory that clanked heavily in the quiet confines of our sessions. I knew, deep down, that some might balk at the very concept of treating such a soul. Disillusioned by my commitment, they would see this as a grave misstep driven by an overzealous idealism that turned a blind eye to the darker shades of morality. But for me, it evolved into a personal pilgrimage, peeling away layers to uncover something both terrifying and exquisite hidden within the human experience. Despite his history, I felt a task far greater than indictment rested upon my shoulders. It was about bridges and understanding, and the ache of recognizing that every antagonist could very well be a protagonist spun into the wrong story. The sun dipped low over the horizon in a golden farewell most evenings as I closed up shop, and each time I brushed past that creaky door, my thoughts would inevitably drift to him. That connection had shaped every earnest "how are you feeling?" and the gentle nudges toward progress I offered my clients. His haunting presence was like a ghost that had woven itself into the fabric of my life, an uninvited friend who refused to leave. Then came the day when he slipped back into my life, almost effortlessly, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. The clinic's phone rang with an urgency that promptly shattered my thoughts. I answered, only to hear his gravelly voice across the line, the kind that had once stuttered halting truths, now noticeably aged, echoing with fatigue. "I need to talk again," he said, a tremor in his tone, laden with either desperation or hope, perhaps both. My heart sank at the unease lining his words, a reminder of vulnerability sharper than glass. "Of course," I replied, a practiced calm enveloping my own bubbling uncertainty. "When would you like to come in?" We arranged for the next day, and as I hung up, the familiar anticipation flooded my veins, tangled with strands of anxiety. Despite all he'd shared, I wondered just how far the edges of his redemption could stretch. He arrived the following afternoon, a spectral sight clad in shadows and what felt like an ocean of burdens. We exchanged muted greetings, the weight of past sessions settling around us like an oppressive fog. I offered him a seat, the worn fabric whispering against the chair as he sank into it. His eyes were tired but kept alert, deeply searching as if willing me to see the fragments of a man who had been stripped down to the core. "I can't shake it," he admitted, his voice a raw whisper that sliced through the air. "The faces, the screams, they're all still there. I thought talking would help, but..." His words trailed off, leaving a palpable silence that bloomed between us. It felt familiar, each rhythm of his voice resonating with the resonance of our prior discussions, yet the frailness of his current state drew a stark contrast against the usually firm man before me. "I need a reason to keep going," he finally confessed, his anguish laid bare. It dawned on me then, the forgiveness he sought wasn't merely for himself, it was for the world outside, a world that had spun on without acknowledging the depths of his plight. I paused, crafting my words as carefully as a sculptor chiseling a marble block. "You've been through an unimaginable experience, and it's okay to grieve what you've lost, including parts of yourself." Encouragement was met with a deluge of bottled experiences spilling forth. He spoke of harrowing nights haunted by memories of despair and fleeting moments of humanity amid the devastation. It was an outpouring that spilled out over the juxtaposition of life and death, a hammer striking an already fragile heart. I listened closely, offering comfort and space for him to release his burdens. As he shared, I realized that my mere presence was creating a safe sanctuary for his pain. And in return, he was handing me insights into the complexity of humanity, the darkness intertwined with light, the monster wrapped in flesh yearning for understanding. The session meandered along the delicate threads of healing, and when it ended, a smile tugged at my lips. In that moment, what we found was shared resilience, a pact of empathy forged anew. As he walked out, lighter than when he entered. I felt our connection soothe my spirit. Outside my window, the sun dipped below the jagged edges of the horizon, casting everything in a glow that felt almost like fresh beginnings. Somehow, we had salvaged something vibrant from the depths, two souls crafted in fire, sharing an understanding that transcended mere shame or vilification. I knew then, in the ebbs and flows of life, we all carry shadows, but it's how we embrace the light that becomes the heartbeat of our stories. Months would pass again, but this wound would no longer press against the fabric of my soul. It was simply a reminder that healing takes many forms, and sometimes the bravest act one can perform is choosing to understand. It was early morning when I received the call that stirred distant memories, pulling me back into the realm of what had once felt like a fever dream. The familiar tone of my office phone cut through the stillness, echoing in the small, softly lit space where I often found respite among the flood of paperwork and therapy notes. The voice on the other end introduced itself as someone from the local clinic. A quick review of my ongoing cases had flagged some lingering concerns regarding one particular patient, Roberto. His name alone conjured an inexplicable mix of emotions. The bond we had forged itched at the edges of my consciousness, reminding me of the chaotic intersection of darkness and light that had forever changed how I viewed suffering and redemption. The directive was straightforward: I must assess his mental state again, as his behavior had begun to spiral back into the shadows. Soft murmurs of concern flared as I listened to the details, words like inappropriate outbursts and intense expressiveness wrapping themselves around the narrative of a man who had once been untouchable in my office, an enigma I had been compelled to understand. A part of me, however reluctant, was ready for this renewed confrontation. I held tightly to the memory of those long sessions where we navigated the raw, jagged edges of each other's truths, his tales of war, chillingly layered with nuance, and my responses, steeped in empathy, attempting to thaw the frozen armor he had forged through a lifetime of conflict. I could still picture him leaning forward, almost animated at times, as he recounted snippets from his past, the smell of distant gunfire, the weight of choices that even fate could not preordain. What had once felt like a burden to sift through now shimmered with the fervor of transformation, reshaping how healing could truly take form. I wondered if I could be his guide again, helping him inch back toward the flickering warmth we had discovered together. When I arrived at the small clinic, the air was heavy with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and unshakable tension. The waiting area felt eerily tranquil, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above as anxious patients clung to the pages of dog-eared self-help books. Roberto sat in the far corner, casting an imperceptible shadow against the walls painted in pastel blues, his hands tight around the frayed edges of his sleeves. Those familiar dark circles encircling his eyes told stories of sleepless nights, of memories refusing to fade. Our eyes met, and within that glance lay everything we had shared, the traumatic echoes of his past and the promise of exploration yet to come. The minute I took my seat across from him, the weight of those shared shadows enveloped us again, as immovable as the gravity of unspoken regret. "Are you all right?" I ventured, noting the slight tremor in his clenched fists. He drew a breath, deeply rooted in unease but tinged with resolve, a mix I had grown to recognize in our sessions. "Sometimes the past just doesn't want to stay behind," he replied, his voice gravelly yet strikingly sweet, like a stone plunged into murky waters, creating ripples of reflection. What followed encapsulated moments that were equal parts heartbreaking and enlightening. Stories tumbled out in jagged snippets, each revealing how the weight of his horrific choices felt heavier still in the light of accountability. As I listened, flashes of recognition flickered within me. All of us, in our own ways, were at war with ourselves, battling regret or shame, yet yearning for connection, a bridge between fractured histories and hope. With each session, I cherished the clarity that arose from our encounters, the understanding that slowly morphed from fear into acceptance, both for Roberto and myself. We weren't separate entities, we were interwoven vessels of experience navigating the escalating tide of emotions that threatened to drown us. He spoke of nights he couldn't close his eyes, of whispered faces that haunted him in fleeting dreams, yet with each confession, a pinprick of healing emerged, connecting us through shared vulnerability. One session melted into another, until bizarrely, the notion of guilt transformed into a raw, electrifying energy, less of an anchor and more of a compass guiding him toward understanding himself, even when he didn't completely believe the journey was justifiable. Months turned into a captivating rhythm of sessions, laden with profound exchanges of love, pain, and redemption. It became clear that he was beginning to redefine his narrative, weaving threads that had only previously been tainted in despair. Finding strength in the light, he learned to speak the truth while bearing that heavy weight, Each session felt like we were peeling back layers of a deeply rooted yet beautiful tapestry. I, too, was unearthing pieces of my own self in the process, questions of morality and humanity grappling within my mind, forging renewed perspectives while allowing empathy to flourish like newfound blossoms in early spring. The day he smiled, truly smiled, was etched like magic in my memory. I want to be better. His words fell like gentle raindrops on parched soil, nourishing the parts of him still yearning for acceptance. I nodded, my heart swelling with pride, for here was a warrior unarmed, wrestling the ghosts of a haunting past. Understanding no longer shackled him but inspired him instead. Yet, just when tranquility seemed to blanket our sessions, whispers of unrest emerged from the clinic, echoing through the hallways about a potential release for Roberto. I found myself at a crossroads, battling anxiety as the thought of him re-entering society and grappling with a world reluctant to embrace those who'd once held the weight of war upon their shoulders tugged at my heartstrings. What if this journey of healing, still so raw, was to be disrupted by a society unwilling to forgive? Each day turned into a nebulous haze where hope and dread revealed themselves as two sides of the same coin. I sought solace in my memories of our progress, yet uncertainty loomed like a storm cloud overhead. When the day finally arrived, and the clinic called me in for one last session before his departure, the room felt electric with unspoken farewells. Roberto emerged quietly, almost reverently, his eyes reflecting an agonizing blend of gratitude and apprehension. As we exchanged the final words, a small part of me clung to the idea that I might see him again, managing to insist on finding connection amid the chaos, willing to embrace the discomfort of disparity. As he stood to leave, our eyes met once more, and I could see it, the light flickering in the depths of his gaze, the will to carry the lessons we had unearthed in the sacred space we'd nurtured. No matter where you go, just remember to seek understanding, I said softly. Theirs was both familiar and alien, intricate tapestries made from war and healing, woven together. Months later, the world beyond the clinic hummed with its relentless rhythm, and I reveled in the quiet strength that silently fortified my practice and life. Healing is indeed a labyrinth, I mused, entwined within shadows and light, and as I reflected on the journey, I realized that sometimes the most painful paths illuminate truths long buried, waiting to re-emerge, the enduring truth that every heart holds the universe of battles fought and emotions shared. Perhaps the real journey lay not solely in the act of healing but in the unwavering spirit that rises, ready to embrace love and connection, even in the wake of madness. I've always found solace in the rhythmic clinking of my crochet hook against the yarn, a form of therapy that allows my mind to drift, cradled in creativity. For the last 5 years, this has been my escape, a little world where I could weave warmth into blankets and gifts for friends and family. When my friend Lucy told me she was expecting her first child, I knew I had to create something special for her, a unique, hand-crocheted blanket that would not only keep the baby warm but also carry the love of a friend. I spent countless evenings after work curating the perfect yarn, deep greens and soft browns, envisioning the joy it would bring. Once the blanket was completed, its imperfections felt like the very essence of handmade art. Each stitch told the tale of my meticulous attention and love. But then, right before the baby shower, panic emerged as I realized I had made a small but glaring error, a stitch pattern inconsistency that not only hurt my eyes but felt like a betrayal of my craft. Refusing to allow this flaw to grab hold, I dismissed it, telling myself Lucy wouldn't care, that the blanket was more about intention and love than precision. However, when I presented it at the shower, she looked puzzled at first, and then disappointed. "Did you mean for it to be like this?" she asked gently, and the warmth in my chest began to cool as I mumbled a half-hearted excuse about it being an artistic choice, wishing for her to be enchanted rather than concerned. The laughter around us felt heavier now, and it was like the moment stretched as I noticed her glancing at that one lopsided corner, her fingers running along the stitches. It all spiraled when, prompted by her mother's insistent critique about blending techniques, I heard Lucy whisper, "Maybe it would just be better if you fixed it." A sudden wave of confusion rushed over me. Fix it? This was my creation. The very idea of unraveling hours of work started to feel like an imposition on the heart behind the stitches. I nodded, my throat tight, and made a decision that felt heavy and liberating at once. I politely reclaimed the blanket that evening, stating that I'd prefer to have it a little longer to perfect it. The room fell silent, as if I had just declared a national emergency. I felt a sinking feeling wash over me. Was I being unreasonable? I distanced myself from the party, a dryness in my throat as I left with my imperfect creation clutched to my chest, hiding my face in its soft fibers. In those moments alone, I grappled with guilt spiraling into indignation. How could anyone expect me to compromise my art, even for love? Yet, the evening left a lingering taste of regret, a sadness threading through my heart like thin strands of yarn unraveling. Days went by with the blanket set aside, untouched, as I continued my needlework but felt the crack in our friendship widening whenever her name surfaced in conversations. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of avoidance, I decided to reach out, sending her a message to discuss my feelings, trying to be open but also tucked away in my vulnerability. Her reply was surprisingly warm, filled with understanding. She confessed to feeling guilty for criticizing something I poured my heart into, and suddenly, I felt the fog clear. I wasn't the only one affected by this moment. We talked it through, weaving our misunderstandings together like a tapestry until it formed something new. I promised to fix the blanket, relaying that my imperfections were a reflection of growth, a lesson in every stitch rather than a product of shame. In the end, I brought back a completed but refined blanket, complete with a note that simply read, "Made with love, flaws and all." She hugged me tightly and smiled through grateful tears, and as I stood there tucked into that moment, I realized the beauty of this journey wasn't just in the work I created but in the connections it fostered, the acceptance of imperfections shared like patched up seams. So here I am, reflecting not just on crochet skills but on friendships and growth, recognizing that sometimes, love is not about perfection, it's about the willingness to embrace each other's patterns, oddities and all. Update: just last week, Lucy sent me a picture of her new baby curled up in the very blanket I'd almost thrown away. All the flaws whispered stories of friendship, and as I stared at that little bundle, I felt at peace, not just with the blanket but with the understanding that in each stitch, I'd learned more than I ever expected about love, patience, and acceptance. As I sat at my kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the window, casting warm patterns on the wooden surface, I thought about how much had changed since I first began crocheting that blanket for Lucy. With every stitch, not only was I creating something tangible, but I was also weaving together moments of our friendship, those late-night talks about dreams and fears, those shared giggles over coffee that turned into hours, and the quiet afternoons where we simply existed in each other's company. The blanket had started as a simple gift, a gesture to celebrate her new role as a mother, but it had unintentionally transformed into a metaphor for our relationship, full of quirks, imperfections, and ultimately, love. I recalled the heated conversation we'd had when I hesitated to give it to her, worried about the mistakes I had made in the pattern, as if flaws would somehow taint the essence of what I was offering. Lucy, however, had looked at me with those kind eyes and said, "It's perfect because you made it for me." The errors are part of its charm. I hadn't understood her then, not completely, but as I gazed at her little one, the image of a tiny hand cradled under the colorful blanket, I felt a soft warmth blossoming in my chest. The blanket was not merely fabric, it was a tapestry of shared memories, acceptance, and the realization that none of us is flawless, yet we cherish each other regardless. Each loop and twist in the yarn told a story, reminding me that love isn't about delivering perfection but rather about giving ourselves the space to grow, to sometimes falter, without fear of judgment. As I brewed a cup of chamomile to accompany my thoughts, I mentally revisited those past emotions, the hesitation, the doubt that crept in when Lucy offered to overlook my mistakes. I had grappled with feelings of inadequacy, wondering if my creations would ever be worthy of her and the new life she was nurturing. Yet as I watched that photo again, I felt a gentle shift within myself. Suddenly, I was filled with a sense of gratitude for the journey we had taken together, for the lessons learned within the tight stitches of a yarn life spun with care and friendship. I allowed myself the grace to feel fondness for the little imperfections I once so criticized, realizing they were stepping stones on this path of understanding and compassion. As I finished my tea and looked back at the wonderfully imperfect blanket wrapped around Lucy's baby, I knew I would carry this lesson with me as life continued to weave its intricate patterns, unafraid of the deliberate messiness that makes us who we are. And now, this blanket, much like our friendship, would serve as a constant reminder that sometimes, the most beautiful creations emerge from embracing the flaws instead of hiding from them. As the evening settled, saturating my living room with a warm, golden hue, I found myself getting lost in memories that had woven together my experience with crochet and friendship. I had picked up the crochet hook years ago as a way to foster a creative outlet while grappling with the stress of my then demanding job. Each pull of yarn through the loop felt meditative, allowing me to escape into a world where each creation existed solely through my hands. And though the projects came to life, imperfectly at times, they were birthed from my heart. I could remember the first blanket I ever made, a cacophony of colors that I thought would all blend beautifully but instead clashed with a jarring audacity. I loved it nonetheless, not for its elegance but for the hours I spent knotting together both yarn and my dreams. However, with Lucy, it was different. She had filled that blanket with stories, laughter, and momentary tears, making it tangible with memories that stretched beyond physical time. Sipping the last remnants of my tea, I allowed myself to linger on the importance of those little imperfections. I could feel now how they mirrored our evolving friendship, two uncertain souls, navigating life's unpredictable waters, sometimes taking a wrong turn but always finding their way back to one another. The moment I had taken back the blanket after Lucy first expressed disappointment was unsettling, a moment where I was too caught in my own expectations to recognize her embrace of the flaws. The night had been tense as we circled around our unspoken words until, finally, I decided to reclaim the wayward stitches, wrapping that crochet into the fabric of my being. Yet, now, reflecting on that very same blanket brought me serenity. Each crooked line symbolized the hurdles we had faced, the miscommunications and reconciliations that had stitched our hearts closer. And as the tranquility of the night seeped into my thoughts, I opened my phone to the picture Lucy had sent. There was the soft, serene image of her baby, wrapped snugly in the blanket, that patchwork of color cradling her little one as they drifted into sleep. At that moment, those carefully crafted imperfections were stripped of their criticism. They told a story, a narrative of love instilled and nurtured. Amidst the chaotic threads of our lives, I realized we were meant to be a bit messy, unexpectedly colorful, intertwining like yarn in a basket. My heart swelled, filled with gratitude and recognizing the gentle waves of forgiveness that wash over us in times of doubt. I had not solely crocheted a blanket, I had crocheted a legacy of acceptance, a reminder that our struggles shape us and that friendships thrive in their honesty. I tucked the memory away for the future, promising myself to carry this lesson onwards, emboldened to embrace life's delightful imperfections without trepidation. In the days that followed, I found myself not just embracing my own imperfections but becoming a beacon for others. My next project, an intricate shawl, turned out to be a manifold of unique colors and patterns, much like the people I cherished in my life. I started sharing my creative process on social media, inviting others to join along as we crocheted together. The response was overwhelming, each post lit up with comments of shared experiences of crafting, bonds formed through honest discussion about life's inevitable messiness. The shawl became a metaphor for every bit of vibrant imperfection, adorned with laughter and tales of growth. I gifted it to Lucy on her birthday, a symbol not of our struggles but of our flourishing friendship. As I handed it to her, the embrace we shared held unspoken words of understanding and gratitude, weaving together all we had experienced. And so, as I come to the close of this reflection, I realize how the greatest creations in my life, be it in crochet or in relationships, have come not from striving for perfection, but from daring to embrace chaos. The blanket still serves as a memento, a connection between two souls learning to navigate their own paths, and I welcome each new stitch I add to the ongoing tapestry of friendship and love that life continues to offer. In this journey, I have found joy not just in the finished product but in every knot, twist, and turn we face, and there lies true beauty. It was a chill evening on New Year's Eve, the kind that held the promise of frozen fingers and warm hearts, but all I could think about was the weight of last year's responsibilities hanging over me like an unwelcome storm cloud. I could hear my family laughing and cheering in the living room while I sat on the wooden steps just outside the house, the chill penetrating through my jeans as I watched the colorful lights twinkle against the night sky. My name is Sam, and for the past 3 years, I had become the designated driver every single holiday. I loved my family, no doubt, but as the laughter echoed in the background, I couldn't help but feel a mix of resentment and exhaustion building within me. The beer-soaked promises of one last wild night had turned into a repetitive ritual where everyone else got to indulge while I faded into the shadows, always the one stuck waiting to make sure the fun didn't drive anyone into a ditch. The irony stung, especially when sort of a family tradition drew me away from the joy of the occasion. I knew I wasn't the type to start trouble, but tonight felt different. It felt like I was suffocating under the weight of expectations, a weight I had carried alone for far too long. So as midnight approached and my siblings began their enthusiastic chants of "Let's hit the town," while simultaneously cracking open drinks like it was an Olympic sport, I made the choice to step back. I decided I wouldn't partake this year, wouldn't shove the corks back into their champagne bottles or preemptively decline the drinks proffered to me. Instead, I summoned the nerve to voice what had been festering in my heart, and I found my father first, his hair turning silver under the living room lights, his laugh resonating like the chime of a joyful bell. "Dad, I need to talk," I said, feeling the lump of anxiety building in my throat. The laughter died down momentarily, and a palpable shift in the atmosphere flickered. I'm not going to be the designated driver tonight. My family looked at me as though I had declared war on New Year's itself. The disappointment in their eyes stung more than I had anticipated, and while they, of course, understood the role I had played in our new tradition, my refusal was met with confusion followed by rising irritation, not just from my siblings but even from the adults who had initially cheered for my sacrifice. I heard the murmurs growing louder. "What do you mean? It's just one night. And come on, Sam, don't ruin it for us," echoed all around. My heart sank deeper with every voice, and doubts began worming their way into my mind. Could I really be that selfish? Was I truly ruining something so beautiful that we had shared? It felt as if guilt was wrapping around me like a tight blanket, smothering any hope of relief I had briefly felt. But just as quickly as the waves of uncertainty crashed in, they receded slightly when I decided to lay down my own terms. I proposed that we could all celebrate at home, together, no bar, no drunken escapades, just the five of us playing games, laughing, and counting down to the new year in the comfort of our own space. My mother's pleading eyes softened as they met mine, and I saw that she understood my need for balance. After a brief but intense back and forth that fizzled into silence, they ultimately agreed, albeit reluctantly. As we set up for a night under the glow of fairy lights and the warmth of shared laughter, I felt lighter somehow, as if I had carved an opening in the dam of expectations that had held me captive. We settled down to play games, eating homemade snacks, and toasting with soda as if we were the most sophisticated group of partygoers. In those moments of laughter, it became painfully clear that I had not ruined New Year's Eve. Rather, I allowed the festivity to shift from an obligation to a genuine celebration of connection that had felt lost amidst the chaos of tradition. Midnight arrived, and we cheered as one. I found myself wishing this would become our new ritual instead of the frantic runs to the bar and the drunken chaos our nights had often turned into. Now, reflecting on that chaotic night, I realized this was not merely an act of defiance but a necessary step towards reclaiming my joy in the midst of expectations. Everyone called it the most memorable New Year they had experienced since childhood, and I smiled a little when I recalled the surprise and glee in their eyes. Still, a small knot of anxiety clung to me, eager to know if my stance had indeed bruised familial bonds or somehow deepened them in the quiet of our shared moments. It wasn't until I received a text from my brother a few weeks later, thanking me for that evening, that I finally exhaled. "We can always go out next year, but I'm glad you stood your ground. It's time we return to what really matters," he said. I know now that sometimes, to embrace soul-deep happiness, one has to willingly stand against the tide and carve out their own space, catching tranquility amidst the noise. After all, joy doesn't only lie in the indulgence of reckless abandon but in the laughter exchanged in simple moments with the people we love the most. As the snow began to melt, revealing patches of earth long hidden beneath the winter's blanket, I found myself reflecting on my brother's message more often than I expected. It was odd how something that had started as a tense confrontation about my role as the designated driver had blossomed into a deeper conversation about our family's values. I spent time thinking about the chaos of that New Year's Eve, the loud music, the clinking glasses full of champagne, and the hazy laughter that seemed to surround everyone but me. Although I had been holding the weight of bitterness for being left out while my family indulged, my brother's kind words encouraged me to let that go. Life carried on, as it tends to do. Spring teased us with its gentle warmth, coaxing the world back into color. Yet, a sense of calm lingered like a forgotten melody from the past, and I began to crave more of that simplicity, more of those genuine, heartwarming gatherings that felt like home. I started initiating these moments, hosting small get-togethers where laughter and conversation flowed freely. We played board games, cooked meals together, and relished in the joy that came from spending time as a family without the distractions of a raucous night out. One Saturday evening, I invited my family over for dinner, fully knowing my mother would undoubtedly bring her infamous baked ZT and my father would come armed with a bottle of red wine that had likely been aging since before I was born. As the familiar smells wafted through the air, I took a moment to appreciate how much it meant to have the people I loved gathered in one spot, free from the pressures of expectation or indulgence. We began to share stories about our lives, and it was during this gathering that I realized my younger sister hadn't been quite herself lately. While everyone chuckled uproariously at my dad's corny jokes, I watched her face, which carried a glimmer of sadness behind her smile. Later in the evening, I pulled her aside into the quiet of the kitchen while the others continued their merriment in the dining room. She looked at me hesitantly, and my heart sank. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice soft and concerned. What unfolded was a tapestry of emotions, as she revealed worries about her own life decisions, feeling lost and pressured to keep up appearances. "I wish I could just be happy without feeling like I have to do what everyone expects," she confided, and in that moment, her words struck a chord deep within me. I wanted to tell her about the clarity I'd found since that tumultuous New Year's Eve, how it was okay to forge our unique paths in search of what genuine happiness felt like, but instead, I simply hugged her tightly. She seemed surprised, but after a moment, she melted into the embrace. As weeks continued to unravel, I saw my family transform, all of us nursing sprouted seeds of newfound understanding. Our gatherings morphed into mini rituals of love, no longer needing the chaos of parties or the allure of nightlife to find joy. We went on picnics at the local park, took day trips to the coast, and even set up a movie night under the stars in my backyard. Each time we gathered, unfiltered laughter echoed and the glimmers of hope rose in our hearts. Then, one evening, as the summer sun dipped below the horizon, bathing everything in amber light, my brother called me. "You know, I've been thinking," he said, his tone slightly hesitant, "I miss the way we used to celebrate the holidays without the stress." I hadn't expected that vulnerability from him, and it felt good to know that my stand held weight not just for myself, but for all of us. "Me too," I replied, a warmth spreading through my chest. "Let's promise each other that next New Year's, we create our own version of what celebration means to us, just us." As we spoke, I felt a bittersweet exhilaration. The new understanding among us transformed our previous traditions into something deeper, a rhythm that reflected who we had become rather than who we used to be. I realized then that standing my ground had sparked a revolution of sorts, in the form of connection and understanding within my family. It was a journey of rediscovery, where we learned that self-advocacy could pave the way for authentic relationships. And as the next New Year's Eve approached, I no longer felt the heaviness of the past, rather, I carried a placid certainty that our celebration would be remembered for its simplicity rather than revelry, for its acceptance rather than pressure. Reflecting once more on the past year, I understood more clearly now that shifting tides, though daunting, could lead us back to the shores of our own happiness, where the heart is light, laughter is abundant, and every moment spent together feels like a gift. I smiled at the thought of it all. Sometimes, to catch tranquility amidst the noise, you simply have to be brave enough to carve your own path. As the days passed into the new year, I often found myself thinking of my brother's text, his words echoing in my mind like gentle reminders of the importance of authenticity. It was invigorating, really, to feel that I had been true to myself, allowing the roots of tradition to pull us closer rather than tear us apart. My family had always been like a tightly wound clock, each spinning hand representing a different personality, a distinct desire. But somewhere along the way, we had lost the harmony of a simple timepiece, opting instead for a dazzling but chaotic illusion of celebration. I found solace in knowing that I had helped reorient that clock just a little, allowing us to tick in rhythm once again. New Year's Day dawned brightly, the winter sun streaming through the frosted windows, painting the room in hues of gold. The warmth of family filled the air, laughter erupting as my nieces and nephews darted around, their tiny feet patting eagerly across the floors, picking up on a contagious energy that promised adventure in the mundane. We gathered around the table, a feast of comfort food laid before us, rich with the sense of roasted meats and home-baked breads, and that familiar twinge of nostalgia pulled me back to childhood. We shared stories, moments of joy, heartache, and past resolutions colliding in a beautiful mess of chatter and shared laughter. I felt a swell of gratitude watching my parents, their faces softened with age but animated with love, gleaming as they witnessed the whirl of activity. My mother glided in with a tray of desserts, her smile radiating warmth, and for a moment I was reminded of the countless New Year's celebrations we had inadvertently sidelined for busier, more extravagant gatherings. Wandering through the gentle living room chatter, thumping music, and the intoxicating aroma of baked goods, I recalled the feeling of disillusionment I had once held about family gatherings. There was something so profoundly satisfying about stepping back and creating a quieter kind of connection, one untainted by expectations. We played board games that day, nothing elaborate, just the classics that brought a sense of familiarity and connection. I felt the worries of the past year melt away in those moments, absorbed in the simple joy of companionship, shared victories, and playful banter. My sister and I shared glances often, nodding knowingly, our hearts full as we recalled that fateful New Year's Eve of change. As evening drew near, and the sun sunk low, the golden light outside transformed into soft hues of lavender and indigo. I took a moment to step outside, breathing in the crisp air filled with the scents of pine and freshly fallen snow. I stood quietly on the porch, letting the chill wrap around me. From where I stood, I could hear laughter bouncing off the walls of our home, the sound resonating like music through the night. In that serene moment, I pondered how the world outside felt cold and chaotic, yet within the walls, everything was warm, safe, and messy, real. As I reflected on my decision from that previous New Year's Eve, I realized it wasn't about refusing fun or indulging in dullness, it was about saying yes to connection over chaos, love over obligations. I had discovered a new definition of joy. When I finally stepped back inside, the raucous laughter enveloped me like a long-lost friend. My heart soared as my brother rushed over to claim his turn at the board game, and I noticed the unspoken unity that hung in the air around us, an evolution from past mistakes into something beautifully different. As midnight approached, we all gathered, ready to face the upcoming decade together, a family again in tune with one another. When the clock struck 12, we exchanged hugs, whispered wishes for the year ahead, and breathed together in the promise of what was to come. There, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and the warmth of shared hearts, I understood that the path I chose had not just changed my journey but had rekindled a bond that was stronger and more assertive than ever, reminding me that sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to embrace the ordinary. The richness of those moments would remain, timeless and golden, echoing softly in the chambers of our hearts. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon when my daughter, Clara, burst through the front door, her cheeks flushed from fresh air and excitement, the kind of joy only a 10-year-old could muster after a long day in school. "Dad," she exclaimed, her energy swirling around the room like a flurry of bees, "can Anna come over for dinner tonight?" On any other day, I would have jumped at the opportunity to have a friend of hers over, but that particular evening, I had a meeting scheduled that would run late, and Clara's best friend lived a good 20-minute walk away. Balancing work and family life was a constant juggling act, but this seemingly simple question ignited a flicker of guilt deep inside me, forcing me into a mental tug-of-war. "Sweetheart," I said softly, knowing I had to explain without dampening her spirits, "I have to leave for my meeting, and I can't walk Anna home after dinner like you want. I'll be back late." Clara's face fell for a moment, her bright smile wavering, but she nodded with an understanding that belied her age. "Okay, Dad," she whispered, but the disappointment hung thick in the air like a low-hanging cloud. As I prepared dinner, a simple pasta dish that Clara loved, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was letting both her and Anna down. After dinner, Clara felt it was essential to call Anna's parents to confirm she could stay for a little longer, and when the conversation shifted to how I wouldn't be able to escort Anna home, I heard muffled laughter on the other end of the line. "It's only a short walk," Anna's mom assured Clara. "She can handle it." I tried to shake off the sinking feeling in my stomach, but the weight of their reassurances felt like daggers piercing my resolve. I had never been one to shy away from responsibilities, and as the minutes trickled away before my meeting, the guilt morphed into an unsettling storm brewing inside me. What if something happened to Anna on that walk? What if I was the one responsible for that? My anxiety was heightened by the swirling chaos of parental judgment that we often hammered into each other on the schoolyard, the unspoken competition of who was doing a better job. I wondered, had I crossed a line? I genuinely believed my reasons were valid, but the idea of Clara's guilt was unbearable. I began to question whether I was, in fact, the one in the wrong. I eventually left for my meeting, doing my best to focus on the work at hand, yet the thought of Clara and her friend lingered as a whisper in my mind, reminding me of the company I was seeking to avoid. When I finally returned home, Clara was sitting on the couch, still waiting for me, while Anna had gone home, and I could not tell if Clara was sad or just simply tired. "Sorry, sweetheart," I murmured, kneeling beside her, "I know it wasn't exactly what you wanted tonight." To my surprise, she looked up at me with a smile that melted the tension away. "It's okay, Dad," she said simply, brushing it off with a wave of her tiny hand. Anna said she liked the walk. That revelation pulled me back, the bubble of relief rising in my chest. On the surface, it was evident Clara had accepted the situation, yet something deep inside me was still yearning for validation. Was I really the asshole here, or just a dad trying to balance practicalities with his daughter's happiness? I lingered on that question as I tucked Clara in that night, the moon casting a gentle glow through her window, and somehow, I realized that parenting meant navigating the gray areas where decisions could neither be categorized as purely right or wrong. A few weeks later, I stumbled upon a thread on Reddit titled "A Myth Asshole," and I curiously typed in my experience. The responses flooded in, varying from fellow parents who validated my struggle to some who accused me of negligence. As I read through the comments, a peculiar sense of community washed over me. It turned out, every parent has been faced with conflicting priorities, and perhaps, the discomfort that lingered in my chest that night was merely a reminder that parenting isn't about perfection, but rather the love and intention behind our actions. The post received a surprising amount of traction, and as I scrolled through a mix of perspectives, a gentle realization settled in my mind: there's no manual for being a parent, we all simply navigate through the darkness, hoping to find a flicker of understanding along the way. As these thoughts echoed in my mind, I savored the comforting warmth of my supportive Reddit community, reflecting on the multifaceted journey of parenthood, and there, amid virtual strangers, I found solace. It was neither the validation I had craved nor the judgment I had feared, but a realization that what mattered most wasn't if I was right, but that I cared deeply enough to question it in the first place. With that gentle realization still warming my heart, I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, surrounded by the familiar chaos of my daughter's room, a tapestry of colorful drawings and dolls that had long ago discarded their pristine packaging. It was within this sanctuary of innocence and creativity that I began to understand the struggle each parent faces in their own way. I felt a pang of guilt about Rebecca, my daughter's friend, and how I had brushed off her request for a walk home. The faint echoes of their earlier laughter still lingered in the air, and I could almost hear the way the two of them had shouted secrets back and forth while playing in the backyard. It struck me then, that in my own swirling thoughts about chores and dinner, I had overlooked the little things that made my daughter feel secure and connected, and Rebecca too. I remembered how they would share dreams of future adventures while sitting on the swings, eyes bright with imagination. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with soft purples and oranges, I tried to piece together what had truly happened earlier. That day, the moment when I dismissed Rebecca's request so easily. It was a moment softened by the warmth of familiarity, that unwritten bond between parents that often feels too delicate to traverse. Perhaps I had thought it would be too much trouble, or maybe I didn't see Rebecca in the light of concern that my daughter did, an almost extension of our family, a girl who laughed a little louder with us, yet remained apart at times. The outdoors were chilly now, the air carrying a crisp scent of fall that crackled like dry leaves underfoot, and I knew I needed to make things right. Before I had time to ruminate any further, I stood up and slipped on my shoes, the soles connecting with the cool wooden floor offering a jolt of determination. I headed downstairs, fueled by purpose rather than guilt, and opened the front door into that refreshing evening chill. I could still see the faint glow of the streetlights ahead, a warm beacon against the encroaching night. Clutching my phone tightly, I called Rebecca's mother. The line beeped, echoing my uncertainty as I waited for her voice, but when she picked up, she was kind, instead of judgmental. We briefly chatted, exchanging snippets of our days, and when I mentioned how I had been contemplating the walk home I neglected, I could hear the smile in her voice when she responded. It was all so simple, yet I felt the weight of each moment we shared gonna dissolve any lingering worries. She assured me Rebecca had made it home just fine, but before we hung up, I asked if it might be all right if I walked with her to school the next day, just to ensure I was a better neighbor and a better parent. There was a brief moment of silence before Rebecca's mother chuckled. Absolutely, I think she'd love that. As I disconnected the call, the tight knot of anxiety in my chest began to untwist. It was hard to describe, that feeling of connection forming anew in this little community encapsulated by the comfort of nightly routines and the soft glow of streetlights. I found myself wandering through the evening, letting my mind linger on small hopes that seemed very large, as I mulled over the power of small gestures and the simple, intricate dance of friendships. Children, I realized, see everything in black and white, navigating their worlds in vivid colors of love and care, and perhaps it was that innocence I had taken for granted. By the time I returned home, the stars were scattered like tiny lanterns across the sky, and every worry I had momentarily faded into the backdrop of an evening gone to slumber. As I nestled into bed that night, something shifted within me, as if I had shed a layer of my past self. Even in my mistakes, the willingness to act, to reach out, to bridge distances however small, became a quiet fortification around my heart. After all, being a parent isn't about perfection but is rooted in connection and those very moments when we recognize our missteps and find ways to grow. And so, with a grateful heart and a serene mind, I drifted off into a deep sleep, knowing tomorrow would hold new possibilities, both for me and for Rebecca, entwined in this dance of discovery we call growing up. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtain, casting soft patterns across my bedroom walls and nudging me awake. The remnants of last night's insights lingered in my mind like a gentle whisper, reminding me of the intricacies of parenting and the lessons tucked within every moment. I rose from my bed feeling lighter, ready to nurture not just my daughter, but also the evolving bond I shared with her friend, Leah. As I maneuvered through our cozy kitchen, its walls adorned with family photographs chronicling our collective laughter and tears, I heard the familiar patter of small feet along the hallway. Rebecca appeared, her hair a tousled halo and her eyes still heavy with sleep, but brimming with the exuberance of a new day. "Can Leah come over today?" she asked, a spark of enthusiasm illuminating her face. My heart warmed at the sight of her unfiltered joy, and I nodded, already imagining the giggles and games that would fill our living room. But a pang of worry threaded through my thoughts. Would Leah feel welcome? Would she, too, share that flicker of childhood glee? With a determined spirit, I set about preparing for their day together. A fresh pot of cocoa brewing, I arranged some snacks, goldfish crackers shaped like tiny fish and vibrant fruits that glistened in the morning light. I left the door open, listening to the sweet sounds of Rebecca making elaborate plans for their imaginary adventures. Over the next few hours, laughter erupted from the living room, a melody that transformed the mundane into a symphony of friendship. I occasionally peeked in, witnessing a tapestry of imaginative play unfold before my eyes, two young friends engaged in a world they created, a nexus of creativity that blossomed in joyous bursts. But as the clock ticked towards lunchtime, I noticed a fleeting shadow cross Leah's face, a furrow of uncertainty that contradicted her laughter. It tugged at my heart, the instinctive urge to protect my daughter from any hurtful situations. I approached them gently, inviting Leah to help me with preparing lunch, hoping to create space for our budding connection. She hesitated but eventually followed me into the kitchen, her fingers gently twirling a lock of hair, an involuntary gesture that revealed her unease. "You're really good at making art, Leah," I said, trying to bridge the gap with warmth. "I saw some of your drawings the other day, how do you come up with those ideas?" Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise igniting amid the softness of her vulnerability. For a moment, she hesitated before venturing, "I just think about what makes me happy." Encouraged by her response, I nudged the conversation further, weaving in my own experiences with art, how it had helped me find joy during tough times. As we chatted, I noticed her shoulders relax, the tension ebbing away with each exchange. By the time we returned to Rebecca, there was a subtle shift in the air. Leah's laughter rang clearer, buoyed by the sense of acceptance that filled our home. After lunch, the three of us sprawled on the floor with markers, paper, and sticky notes. I watched as Leah shared her ideas with Rebecca, who infused them with her own silly antics. They embarked on a frenzy of creativity, and soon the dining room transformed into an explosion of colors, the lyrics from their favorite songs floating through the air as they danced amid their imaginings. It was in those moments, those delicate and unscripted memories, layered with laughter and imaginative play, that I felt the morning's wisdom coalesce within me. I felt grateful for the opportunity to step beyond my own discomfort. After Leah's mother arrived later in the day to retrieve her, I found myself yearning for a way to continue fostering their connection, knowing it wasn't just about me learning to navigate the complexities of relationships, it was about Rebecca growing into someone who could embrace and understand her friends' emotions, too. I felt that night, as darkness settled gently over our neighborhood, that my heart grew alongside the girls' beautiful friendship. I reflected on the valuable lesson Leah had unknowingly imparted, about how even in our uncertainties, our willingness to listen and create connections formed an unbreakable bond that made us all just a little less alone in this vast world. Resting my head on the pillow, I closed my eyes and anticipated tomorrow's adventures, each day a new page in our story, a story I had the privilege, chaos included, to help shape alongside my daughter and her friends. As sleep enveloped me once more, I found peace knowing we were all just navigating this world together, a circle of support hand in hand as we explored the worth of every little moment, including those imperfect ones where our hearts expanded just a bit more. I still remember the first time I walked into that small examination room, framed by pale yellow walls that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, with a flickering fluorescent bulb that hummed overhead like a persistent ghost trying to breach the silence. As a fresh-faced medical intern, I was filled with an overwhelming mix of eagerness and anxiety, flipping through pages of notes on patient rapport and ethics while trying to remember the dozens of diseases I'd only ever read about in textbooks. I wanted to make a difference, to heal and to help. But it was during that first week that life decided to hit me with a hard truth that I could never have prepared for. I was assigned to a pediatric ward, which was both a blessing and a challenge, teeming with stories that tugged at the heartstrings in ways I was still figuring out how to process. My very first patient was a young girl named Lily, with golden curls that framed her cherubic face and a smile bright enough to fill the room. Once a ray of sunshine, she had started to dim, battling a rare form of leukemia that had robbed her of her joy and her childhood. At just 8 years old, she was grappling with the reality of her treatment, the endless needles piercing her small arms, and the isolation that accompanied her illness. I was assigned to her care, and it felt like being handed a delicate glass sculpture. I wanted to protect her, to help in whatever way I could. Yet, the weight of her vulnerability crushed me in an unexpected way. Day by day, I observed how the sterile scent of antiseptics hung in the air, intertwined with cheerful decorations on the walls that seemed to mock the gravity of her situation. Our conversations flowed like a gentle stream, with her effortlessly transitioning from her favorite animated shows to the games she missed playing outdoors. I laughed along with her, tried to adopt her innocence and optimism, but inside, I felt an ache that gnawed at my insides. My time with her was fleeting in the grand scheme of her treatment, external to the ebb and flow of what I was learning. I had never encountered this kind of emotional terrain before. How could I balance my professional responsibilities while also forming a bond that felt so achingly human? I went home each evening wondering if I should be feeling more detached or allowing myself to care deeply for this tiny soul who was learning at such a tender age that life could sometimes be cruel. Then came the day when the doctor pulled me aside, his brow furrowed under the weight of difficult words. The treatment wasn't working. Lily had developed resistance to the chemotherapy drugs they had been using. He spoke in hushed tones, outlining potential alternatives, but each option felt like more of a gamble than a safety net. I left the huddle feeling hollow, knowing I had to face her with this unwelcome truth. That evening, as I prepared myself to sit by her side, I felt a tsunami of panic wash over me. How do you explain that the medicine meant to heal her was now failing? How can one express that kind of heartbreak without shattering the fragile spirit of a child? Sitting down next to her bed, I tried to keep my tone light, but she could see through my facade. "You look sad," she said, her innocent blue eyes searching mine for answers. I opened my mouth to reassure her, but nothing came out. Her tiny hand reached out and clasped mine, an innocent gesture that ignited something powerful within me. I finally spoke, telling her that we were in this together, that she was brave and strong, but inside, my heart felt like it was breaking. I thought about the guidelines and the ethics, the tightrope that healthcare professionals are expected to walk between their emotions and responsibilities, how HIPAA measures guard our patients' privacy but often leave us feeling emotionally isolated from one another. The words echoed in my head, they prescribe distance, but how could I maintain that with a girl who truly was just a child? In the following days, as we both faced the harsh realities ahead, she began to ask me about my life, who I was, where I came from, things I never thought I would share with a patient. I found myself divulging snippets of my own story, whether about my childhood dreams or my recent hobbies, and she would eagerly respond with tales of her favorite books. In those moments, laughter would bubble between us, momentarily dispelling the heavy veil of grief that lingered over her room. Each visit became a bittersweet fusion of joy and despair, an exchange of life even on days that felt suffocatingly bleak. Yet, the inevitable happened 4 weeks later. Lily's condition suddenly worsened, and I knew deep down that we were nearing an end. I sat beside her in silence, holding her small hand, realizing that the barrier between patient and caregiver had irrevocably torn. It was during those last moments, when she looked up at me with those trusting eyes, that everything stopped. We shared a laugh, a flicker of joy amidst the heavy heartache, and she whispered, "I'll always be your friend." Just moments later, her breaths grew shallow, the beep of machines fading into a haunting lullaby. I could only grasp her hand tighter, the tears now streaming down my face as she exhaled for the last time, her little body finally releasing the burden it had carried. It broke me. I lost a piece of myself that day. I left the hospital that evening feeling heavier than I had ever felt before. I hadn't held myself together, nor did I understand how one could maintain professionalism when one's heart was so deeply entwined in the difficult fabric of a life lost too soon. And as I sat in the back seat of the cab, staring blankly at the passing street lights, the weight of the world pressed down on me, an acute reminder of what it meant to be fragile. I realized that no amount of HIPAA training or medical knowledge could prepare me for the emotional tapestry woven between healing and loss, the deep, sometimes cruel bond we form with those we are meant to care for in this life. Now, months later, I reflect on that time with Lily with a bittersweet sense of acceptance. The journey of healing doesn't always mean mending. Sometimes, it's about learning to carry the pieces of what was lost with compassion and grace. I still work in healthcare, still hold the hands of children, and every day, I remind myself of that laughter, the light she brought into even the darkest of rooms, and I know that for every heart I may break, I also have the opportunity to build bridges of connection, however fleeting they may be. Because at the end of the day, it is the love we share, even in sadness, that truly helps us heal. As I sit here, reflecting on those poignant memories, I'm reminded of a patient who brought me an unexpected lesson in love and loss. It began quietly, like a whisper of fate, when I received the case of a young boy named Ethan, a bright-eyed 7-year-old with a spirit that shone even in the confines of the hospital. The first time I entered his room, his laughter rang out like sweet music, flowing against the stark white walls adorned with cheerful drawings that filled the space with a remarkable warmth. The joy he radiated was infectious, serving as a stark contrast to the sterile environment that usually wrapped us all in its cold embrace. I was a few years into my career, passionate yet inexperienced, still wrestling with the emotional toll of caring for those in need while protecting my heart from the inevitable heartaches that healthcare often brings. Ethan had been diagnosed with leukemia, a battle he faced with the bravery of a lion, cracking jokes about his hair loss and insisting that the doctors were merely making him a little superhero ready to save the world. His resilience and ability to find light in darkness reminded me of that precious child I lost, and each bittersweet laugh of Ethan struck a chord in me. It was a delicate dance, almost like walking the tightrope of hope and fear, both wondering if I could risk getting attached while knowing he was in a precarious place. With each passing day, I would sit by his bedside, sharing stories, jokes, and even the occasional tears. It felt like a privilege to be a part of his journey, to witness a child's will to fight, to dream, even when pain threatened to pull him under. Yet, there came a day when I walked into his room, expecting the usual banter. Instead, I was met with an unsettling silence, the kind that wraps around you like fog, heavy and suffocating. On that day, Ethan's eyes were closed, a thin sheet pulled tightly over his frail body, his mom sitting beside him, cradling his tiny hand in hers. I felt that familiar pang in my chest, the fear of the inevitable, but I steadied myself, reminding myself to stay present, to honor every moment. I whispered sweet greetings, sharing tales of the outside world, of bright sunny days just waiting for him to conquer. But it was Ethan's reply that shattered me. As he opened his eyes, that spark, a fire I thought would never dim, flickered weakly. He looked toward me, and with a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Can we still go on our adventures in my dreams? I want you to come with me." It felt like a knife twisting in my gut, ruthlessly. How could I tell a boy who had fought so valiantly that sometimes dreams are where we go to escape our realities? Instead, I smiled, and with a gentle nod, I promised him we would embark on our greatest quest yet. That night, as I lay in my own bed, wrestling with sleepless thoughts, I found myself drifting into a world of dreams. In my mind's eye, I could see Ethan and me, soaring above mountains, diving into oceans filled with sparkling fish, laughing as we sprinted through fields of swaying flowers. It was beautiful and vivid, a tapestry woven from all the joy he had shared. The following days felt like a montage, memories played in fast forward, until it was time for Ethan to say goodbye. To see his heartache mirrored in the faces of his family was solace and sorrow entwined, a bittersweet symphony I was all too familiar with. I held his hand as he took his last breaths, wishing I could take away every ounce of pain with my bare hands, pleading silently for a miracle. And when he finally drifted, his peaceful face etched in my memory, I realized this was a part of my journey, a part that I had to carry with compassion and grace. The hardest moments in our lives often shape our paths into something beautiful, something meaningful, no matter how tragic. Looking back on that chapter, I understand now that pain exists alongside joy, and healing does not equate to forgetting. I learned to wear my scars as badges that remind me of the love shared, even in fleeting moments, and how those moments can bridge what feels like an insurmountable divide. Nowadays, I pour all that I've learned into every child I encounter, sharing laughter, kindness, and a gentle presence to remind them that it's okay to be vulnerable, to embrace emotions, even the hardest ones. Because, in the end, it's not about the hearts we break, it's about the love we've given and the connections we've had, even when they remind us of what we've lost. My journey continues, and while the weight of grief never truly disappears, it has shaped me, making me more compassionate and empathetic. Life, an unpredictable and beautiful mess, brings us together, even as it tears us apart. And with every child's laughter I hear, I remember that the journey of healing is about cherishing those memories, carrying the pieces forward, and giving love as fiercely as we feel loss. Every day, I hold on to the hope that in the end, it is this love that helps us heal. Update: a few weeks after Ethan's passing, as I sat in the break room with my colleagues, a familiar face walked in. It was Ethan's mother, a visit I had not anticipated. She sparked a conversation. That felt like a warm embrace, recounting stories of Ethan's joy, his love for life, and how he often spoke of our adventures and dreams. She reached out, holding my hand, tears glistening in her eyes, and said, "Thank you for seeing him, for sharing his laughter and reminding us all of the beauty in even the hardest days." In that moment, I understood, we were continuing the journey together, carrying pieces of love that transcended loss, forming a bond that would forever connect us. As we sat together in that small, dimly lit room, I could feel the weight of her gratitude pressing down on me, heavy yet sweet, like the promise of rain after a long drought. Ethan's mother, with her fragile smile, drew me back into the memories of all the times we shared with her son, his insatiable giggles echoing in the sterile air of the clinic, his mischievous antics that wove laughter into the fabric of our often somber surroundings. Each story she shared wrapped around me like a soft blanket, warming me against the chill of grief that I sometimes felt creeping at the edges of my heart. I realized then that healing isn't something we do alone, it's a community effort built on shared love and poignant moments. We spoke for hours, the outside world fading into the background as we became a safe haven for each other. She recounted the day Ethan saw the ocean for the first time, how wide his eyes grew, and how he squealed with delight as the waves danced around his tiny feet. With each story, I could see the flicker of life return to her eyes, a reminder that even in our most profound sorrow, the essence of our loved ones remains forever illuminated in the joy they imparted. In that shared vulnerability, we formed an unspoken pact, a promise to honor Ethan not just in our memory but by living fully, by embracing the joy and laughter that he once brought into our lives. As our hands remained clasped, I could feel the pulse of our connection, a lifeline forged through loss and laughter, through heartbreak and hope. As the shadows lengthened in the room and the soft glow of evening crept through the window, I sensed that this was more than just a visit, it was a turning point. We could grow together in our grief, transforming it into something beautiful and nurturing rather than allowing it to cut us off from joy. I began to contemplate ways I could honor Ethan's legacy, perhaps by organizing a small gathering for families within the hospital, creating an evening of joy where laughter could fill the air the way he once had, a butterfly flitting from one bloom to another, leaving behind traces of wonder. Leaving that day, I felt lighter, as if I had shed a layer of sorrow and found room for new beginnings. I held on to our radiant conversation, replaying her words in my mind. Even in sadness, we could stir the depths of joy. Love was not merely a memory, it was a force vibrant and alive. Days turned into weeks, and with each new sunrise, I found renewed inspiration. Within myself and my work, I pored over every detail of the event I was planning, wanting it to reflect Ethan's essence, a blend of creativity, imagination, and the exuberant spirit he had embodied. Finally, the night arrived, and the community gathered under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights, laughter melding with the soft sounds of night. I stood at the front, heart racing as familiar faces mingled, their smiles interspersed with bittersweet reminders of what we had lost. We filled the space with colors, balloons, painted rocks, and banners that announced the joy of living and loving deeply, something that Ethan had taught us with every smile he shared. I watched as families interacted, each tender moment a testament to connections being forged anew, and it felt as if Ethan was right there with us, his laughter curling around us like a tender embrace. That evening was transformative. It not only stood as a monument to Ethan's joy but also as an invocation of our own healing paths. As I looked around at the smiling faces, I realized how far we had all come, united through both our grief and joy. I could hear echoes of laughter that were reminiscent of the sweet sounds he once made, and it filled my heart to know we were all learning to carry those pieces together, to find joy even amidst shadows. Reflecting back, I understood that every life touched holds the potential to spark connections that ripple far beyond our immediate perceptions of loss. The memory of Ethan no longer felt like a fragile remnant of pain. Instead, it had metamorphosed into a vibrant reminder of the resistance of joy. The journey of healing doesn't always mean mending, but it most certainly means learning to carry the pieces of what was lost with compassion and grace, and for that, I will forever be grateful. Update: a few months later, I received a message from Ethan's mother. She told me that her family started a tradition of celebrating Ethan's favorite things every year, flying kites in the park on his birthday, with laughter resonating through the breeze, reminding them to cherish every fleeting moment of joy life offers. She invited me to join, and I could hardly hold back the tears that welled in my eyes. I realized then that love is never truly lost, it finds new ways to wrap around us, creating connections that bring light even in the darkest of places. I never imagined my life could pivot so dramatically over something as mundane as a locked door, but here I am, recounting the events of that fateful evening with a sense of incredulity that still lingers. My name is Alex, an ordinary 30-something guy with a desk job and a comfortable little home nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I've always prided myself on being a conscientious husband, but like everyone else, I have my moments of negligence, and perhaps it was a combination of those moments that set this all in motion. It was a Thursday night, typical in every way, until I caught a glimpse of my wife, Laura, standing by the front door, her expression a mixture of frustration and disbelief, the kind that made my chest tighten in an instant. She was holding the doorknob, twisting it back and forth while I was half awake from a cozy couch nap, remnants of my evening routine still fresh in my mind, the warm glow of the TV, a snack bowl emptied, and the soft hum of the world outside. Laura asked me, with a sting of disappointment, if I had checked the lock after she'd gone to bed, and as I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, I realized I had utterly spaced on that detail, again. I shrugged it off at first, making casual remarks about how I trust our neighborhood and how we had lived there for years without incident. But in the back of my mind, I felt a creeping unease as I watched her react, her brow furrowed as she responded, "It's not about trusting the neighborhood, Alex. It's about being safe." A part of me wanted to laugh it away, to dismiss her concerns as overreactions like I once did during our years together, but as she continued to express her frustration, I felt a knot forming in my stomach, linking back to my own lack of accountability. Was I really that oblivious? It became clear that this situation was a metaphorical lock waiting to be clicked open, revealing deeper issues that may have long since festered beneath our shared surface. Days passed, and the conversation wafted in and out of my mind, my interactions with Laura feeling increasingly stifled like the air on a humid summer day. I'd watch her move through the house, her movement subtle yet heavy with a sense of grounded concern, the way a cloud hangs low and suspenseful, threatening rain. I noticed the little things, the way she double-checked the locks on the windows during the day, her growing habit of closing the blinds earlier than usual, her hesitance to walk to the mailbox alone. The peaceful rhythms of our life together felt interrupted as I tried to ignore the gnawing sensation at the back of my mind. The evening we normally spent side by side on the couch morphed into quiet, fragmented moments filled with awkward silences. It all came to a head one night when I returned home later than usual after meeting some friends for dinner. There she stood in the living room, awaiting my arrival like a lighthouse beacon cutting through the fog, arms crossed with a stern look on her face that I'd never seen aimed directly at me. I opened my mouth to greet her, but the words caught in my throat. I could sense it was more than just the locked door. "Did you even check the door?" Her voice was steady but tinged with a puncturing edge that stung more than I cared to admit. I hesitated, the silence stretching into a chasm. "No, I didn't," I finally admitted, the echo of those words reverberating through the room like a confession made under duress. "I just assumed you had it." It felt pathetic, my own excuse evaporating into the atmosphere. My stomach twisted again, I could see pain flickering through her eyes, an emotion beyond mere frustration, a sense of betrayal, of being let down by me, the one person she should be able to count on. Suddenly, it struck me, it wasn't just about the door, it was about trust, about dependence, about the fragile threads that held together our relationship. I realized how much she leaned on me, expected me to be her rock, and I had neglected even the simplest thread keeping our safety intact. As we sat on the couch that night, the air thick with unspoken words and fragile hopes, I squeezed her hand and spoke softly, "I'm sorry. I thought I was being rational, but I wasn't being responsible. I promised to do better, to pay attention, to make you feel safe, not just when it's convenient for me." She responded by tracing her fingers along my palm, the tension easing as the minutes passed. The silence transformed from oppressive to contemplative, and we found ourselves deep in conversation, navigating our fears, our trust, and the small yet pressing details of our shared lives. As the moonlight spilled through the window, I understood that the lock was just a symptom of a deeper issue, my unpredictability and her need for assurance. Weeks later, our routines began to shift. I made it a point to verify every lock, not just for Laura, but as a symbol of my commitment to being present and responsible. The atmosphere in our home brightened, she smiled more, and we dove into rebuilding that connective thread, one soft conversation, one warm touch at a time. Reflection filled those quiet moments. We'd sit together on the couch, and as she leaned against me, I felt a new kind of peace emerging from our shared vulnerability. And so, in the spirit of Reddit tradition and as a reflection of this journey, I find it important to add this update. The evening I thought we were heading toward a rift transformed instead into an awakening. It wasn't just about the door or even the act of locking it. It became a way to openly articulate our needs, desires, and fears. I learned that perhaps it wasn't an Ida situation at all. Perhaps, instead, it was Atel, am I trying to learn? Because in that small, seemingly trivial episode, I discovered something profound about love, trust, and the importance of the little things in creating a safe harbor we could always come home to. The door has never been left unlocked. Again, and neither have our hearts. As the weeks rolled into months following our profound conversation about the door, I found myself reflecting on the subtle transformations in our relationship. It became a game of sorts, where each night, as I prepared to settle into bed, I would gently remind Lucy to double-check the lock, teasing her playfully about my newfound security obsession. I could feel the fortress we were building, not merely around our home but within each other, grow stronger and stronger. It was surprising how such a simple act could blossom into moments filled with tenderness and laughter, a little more anticipation before sleep took us. We began establishing new rituals, little habits that weren't mandated by duty but born out of a desire to nurture our partnership. Each evening concluded with us sharing a cup of tea on the porch, watching the day melt into night, with the faint sounds of crickets filling the air, a gentle reminder that life outside continued in a rhythm we were beginning to appreciate together. I started to look at our relationship with a new lens, where open communication became our foundation, and vulnerability, once a source of anxiety, transformed into our shared strength. I cherished those confiding moments with Lucy, preparing dinner together and laughing over burnt bread, the usual small talk evolving into deeper discussions about our hopes for the future. Conversations flowed like sacred threads binding us closer, so much so that I almost forgot what it felt like to walk that thin line of misunderstanding that we had been teetering on prior. It amazed me how our vulnerabilities morphed into stepping stones, carving pathways to rediscover the intricacies of each other's souls, learning, once again, what made us who we were. There were times, of course, where we stumbled. There were disagreements around financial decisions or the occasional miscommunication that prompted a surge of frustration, but even then, instead of retreating into silent resentments, we breathed, discussed, and gently nudged each other toward a healthier understanding. I realized that those moments are just as essential as the laughter-filled ones, they rounded us out. However, the true test of this new dynamic came on a chilly autumn night. The air bit fiercely against our cheeks, and the neighbors' laughter echoed through the street, reminding me of the warmth radiating from our home. Lucy and I were cozied up on the couch, engrossed in a movie, when suddenly an urgent knocking interrupted the cozy ambience. My heart raced. Was it a stranger? A lost traveler? That familiar feeling of anxiety tugged at my chest as I glanced at Lucy, who only nodded, encouraging me to check the door. It felt as if time had slowed. I walked to the front door, the wooden floor creaking beneath my weight, feeling every heartbeat pulsing in my ears. Peering through the peephole, I was met with a young girl, maybe 10 years old, shivering and teary-eyed. I opened the door just enough to speak. "Hey there, are you all right?" Her face was lost in shadows, but I could make out the tremor of her chin and the way she rubbed her arms together, as if trying to generate warmth. I got lost. Can I call my dad? He's just around the corner." My mind spun. Here I was, in our safe bubble, our haven, facing a potential crisis. A moment of fear tangled with empathy bubbled inside me. It was a test of everything we had learned, our commitment to openness, to addressing fears head-on. "Of course, sweetie, come in," I said, opening the door wider and motioning for her to step inside. As the warmth enveloped her, she glanced back at the darkened street, her eyes wide with uncertainty. I knew that this small act could either shield her further from threats or potentially lead to something more dangerous. Lucy joined us, her nurturing presence illuminating the moment, and we quickly settled into a space of safety and comfort. I reached for my phone, handed it to the girl, and patted her on the shoulder. "Just dial the number you remember. We're right here with you." The girl's hands shook as she dialed, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke to her father. She relaxed slightly upon hearing him say he was on the way, and when she hung up the phone, her relief washed over me, filling the room with a profound quiet that seemed to hold stories of fear and safety in equal measure. When her dad finally arrived, our home transformed again, this time into a sanctuary, a temporary refuge. The girl rushed into her father's arms, and I felt an overwhelming gratitude that we were able to offer even this tiny comfort amidst her disarray. After exchanging pleasantries and ensuring she was safe, the father made it clear how invaluable our kindness was, lighting a small flame of warmth within me. After they left, as Lucy and I settled back down on the couch, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for everything in our life together. It suddenly struck me that it wasn't merely about locking the door, it was about being open to the world outside, understanding that the safety and love we built weren't just for ourselves but could spill over into interactions that mattered with everyone around us. The door, once just an entryway to our home, had morphed into a symbol of our commitment to compassion and understanding, not just for each other but for anyone who crossed our threshold. I turned to Lucy, and we exchanged a smile filled with warmth and an unspoken promise that we would always remain open, vulnerable but secure, cautious yet loving, a true masterpiece of coexistence. And in those moments of quiet reflection, surrounded by the fading light of the evening, I finally felt the weight of the world lift just a little, reminding me that love doesn't simply build walls, rather, it constructs bridges that lead us back to humanity, again and again, one gentle reminder, one locked door, at a time. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across our cozy living room, I could feel the gentle hum of evening settling in, the kind that wraps you in a cocoon of comfort. Lucy had lit a few candles, their soft glow flickering in harmony with the settling tranquility of the night. It was a small ritual we had embraced, a moment of unwinding where the chaos of the day seemed to melt away. The warmth of her presence reminded me that we had crafted a safe space together, not just through the physical act of locking the door, but through the emotional openness we had nurtured in our relationship. Pacing softly, I felt grateful for this revelation, how something as simple as a door could serve as a metaphor for our willingness to safeguard one another's vulnerabilities. "Remember that night?" Lucy asked, her voice laced with a gentle nostalgia as she curled up on the couch, her eyes sparkling with memories. "The one where we both brainstormed a list of our fears?" She chuckled lightly, and I joined in, recalling a time when our insecurities seemed larger than life. We had laughed as we shared everything from mundane anxieties about work to deeper concerns about our relationship. That honest exchange had unknowingly paved the way for our newfound understanding of what it meant to connect, truly connect, beyond surface-level conversations. "Yeah," I replied, settling in beside her and draping an arm around her shoulders. "It's amazing how vulnerability can turn into strength if we let it." The moment felt precious, the world outside blurring into insignificance as we cocooned ourselves in this intimate bubble of safety. We began to share not just our fears, but our dreams, each whisper more soothing than the last, forming a tapestry of hopes that we would nurture together. I felt a rush of contentment, realizing that each lock I checked, each door I secured, was a commitment, an act of love that transcended fear and doubt. As the bits and pieces of our evening unfolded, conversations sparked like fireworks, our discourse ranging from future vacations we dreamed about to our desire to bring a pet into our home. Lucy was still talking about getting a dog, something I had initially hesitated over, wary of the added responsibility, but the way she spoke, her eyes lighting up at the thought, began to chip away at my resistance. A dog would be more than just an addition to our lives, it would be a shared experience, a reminder of how love could flourish in the little moments, from morning walks to lazy afternoons spent on the couch. With every word exchanged, I felt the door we had just locked moments before transform into one that swung wide open, inviting in a rush of warmth. As the candles flickered gently, casting playful shadows on the walls, I could see what lay ahead of us, a future painted in shades of laughter, compassion, and unwavering support. It was empowering to realize that we weren't just locking away our fears, we were also sealing in our joys, ensuring that nothing could breach the sanctuary we were building together. In time, as the evening wore on and the moon cast a silver glow through our window, I took a moment to breathe deeply and internalize the warmth of this connection we were nurturing. The world outside felt distant, almost irrelevant, as I realized that our relationship had morphed from merely coexisting to truly living, a shared journey where each step was marked by intention and understanding. "Have you ever thought about how locking the door is kind of a ritual?" I mused aloud, breaking the comfortable silence that had enveloped us like a soft blanket. Lucy nodded, her dark hair catching a glimmer of candlelight. "It's the first step we take in closing out the outside world," she said thoughtfully, "but it also makes space for us to just be, here, in our little world. It's our way of saying, this is our time. We matter." "Yes," I replied, feeling a swell of pride and love. It wasn't just about locking the door, it was about what it symbolized, the commitment to honor our space and each other. The balancing of boundaries and openness that allowed for growth without losing our individuality. I couldn't help but smile, envisioning the dog we might someday share. Next door might be the kids, or the noise of the world, but in this moment, it's just us. As the last flicker of the candles dimmed, I felt a deep reassurance envelope me, a tender acknowledgement that our bond was evolving in ways that were once unimaginable. I snuggled closer to Lucy, feeling the warmth radiating from her, a beacon in the cool night. The locked door wasn't just a safeguard, it was a promise we had made to each other, a vow to always return to the safe harbor we had created. And so, as I closed my eyes and allowed sleep to wash over me, I found solace in the laughter that echoed through the evening and the new dreams we would embrace upon waking. A door locked, yet ajar with possibility, standing as a testament to our journey. And with that, I drifted into sleep, content, loved, and forever learning. It started as a normal Tuesday morning, the kind where you barely have time to sip your coffee before racing out the door for work. My job at a modest tech company in Seattle had become my routine. I was programmed to rise, work, and repeat, barely catching my breath in between. It was a dreary day, the clouds thick with the promise of rain, and I settled into my chair beneath the fluorescent lights, half listening to my coworkers' banter about the latest game release and plans for the weekend. That was when it happened, a sudden, loud buzz originating from all our screens, followed by the words flashing in bold, uppercase letters, "Hide." I looked around, stunned. My boss, usually the calm in any storm, froze mid-sentence, his eyes wide. A collective murmur spread like wildfire through the office as coworkers pulled out their phones only to find the same message plastered across social media, news apps, even our personal devices. Panic began to seep in, that creeping sense of dread rooted deep within my gut, as people scrambled to understand what was happening. I live alone, and my thoughts instantly drifted to my neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, an elderly woman who often relied on my borrowed sugar and occasional help with her garden. After a few moments of confusion, I found myself racing up the stairs, urgency propelling my movements. By the time I knocked on her door, I was shaking. I had already mentally rehearsed a myriad of possibilities. Was this a prank? A glitch? I heard shuffling from inside, followed by her croaky voice beckoning me to enter. Dropping my fear like a heavy coat on the rack, I stepped into her dimly lit apartment. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, a feeble attempt to mask the cooking smells from the night before. Mrs. Hargrove was seated on her threadbare couch, clutching her knitting needles like a lifeline. "Did you hear it, too?" she asked, eyes darting to the window as if the world outside would provide answers. We turned on the television, and the news broadcasters, usually so composed, were stumbling over their words, repeating the message, advising people to stay indoors, turn off their lights, and remain quiet. An inexplicable fear rippled through me. We sat together in comfortable silence, knitted tightly by the uncertainty of the moment, only the occasional crackle of the TV filling the void. My hand found hers, her warmth was a small comfort against the cold that crept into my bones. Hours passed, but the message remained, echoing in my mind, urging everyone to hide. I thought of how many times I'd taken her for granted, how our chats of mundane things, weather and gardening, had become my escape. We were two souls lost in an inexplicable moment, clinging to each other for reassurance even as her fear morphed into something deeper. As the sun began to set, shrouding the room in shadows, my phone buzzed insistently, notifications continued to pile up. I glanced at the screen. To my astonishment, the message had changed. It now read, "Doubt leads to vulnerability. Remain silent." With a chill, I looked at Mrs. Hargrove, whose hand was now tightening around mine, her eyes wide. "What does it mean?" I whispered, the question heavy with unsaid fears. She merely shrugged, her gaze flickering towards the flickering television, now filled with static. Then, just as quickly as the chaos had begun, it was gone. The screens turned blank, the world outside returned to its untroubled state, yet we sat, entangled in each other's worry, stunned silence stretching between us like an unbridgeable chasm. The next morning brought no clarity, we had not slept a wink, the tension of those hours weighing on our hearts like lead. As we emerged from our hiding, both bewildered and exhausted, I found the streets oddly sterile, the people moving through their routines with a peculiar detachment, almost as if they'd decided together to forget that one insidious message. My mind raced back to the uncertainty of that night, and a secret buried deep within me began to unfurl. The event had acted like a mirror, reflecting my own hidden fears, not for my life but for the connections I had taken so lightly. Mrs. Hargrove and I soon became inseparable. Our shared experience forged an unspoken pact, binding us together in our quiet sanctuary. As mundane as the days turned, I never went a day without checking in, ensuring she was well. It seemed that, in those moments of fear, I had found something truly precious, a friendship built from vulnerability, long evenings spent sipping tea and knitting, exchanging stories that reminded me of the beauty hidden within the everyday. And every now and then, when the shadows started closing in and the world felt too loud, I'd catch myself glancing at the windows, half wondering if the screens would ignite again, awakening the part of us that we'd left behind. Months passed, and just as I began to feel entirely at home in my newfound reality, I received a notification on my phone one evening, a message from somewhere unknown. Scrolling past the usual mundane alerts, my heart raced as my eyes locked onto the words flickering across the screen, "It's not over." In that moment, the cozy blanket of comfort that had enveloped my days peeled away, exposing me to the chill of uncertainty once more, and the thought echoed in my mind, what exactly was lurking in the shadows, waiting for another opportunity to strike? Now, it wasn't the screens I feared. It was my own heart, wondering if it had been bold enough to open itself up once again or if the next message would tell me to hide, again. The days that followed were punctuated by a strange mixture of paranoia and nostalgia. I often found myself staring at my phone, waiting for another message to flicker across my screen, as if it would somehow provide clarity in the whirlwind of confusion that had engulfed my thoughts. The sense of foreboding clung to me like a ghost, whispering reminders of the darkness that had nearly consumed me before, a darkness I thought I'd escaped. I had opened up to my closest friend, Lily, a few months back about my struggles, how a year-long battle with anxiety had left me feeling shackled within my own mind. It was thrilling to finally share my burden, yet with every confession, I felt that I've pushed her away, entangling her in my turmoil. She would often tell me it was brave to be vulnerable, yet my heart ached for the distance I imagined between us. Those late-night conversations over steaming cups of chamomile did fill the cracks in my soul, yet as dread seeped in again, I wondered if any breakthrough was truly positive. The messages hadn't just stirred fear, they unearthed old wounds, like a physician ripping off a bandage that had long since bonded with skin, leaving the tender flesh exposed and raw. Whenever Lily would check in, her texts were laced with a delicate balance of concern and cheerfulness that made my heart ache for the carefree days we once shared. Deep down, I wondered if I could muster the courage to tell her how the recent turn of events had reopened those emotions, and in a way, placed a wedge between us, a wedge invisible to her but painfully evident to me. One evening, just as the sky turned from a pale blue to a soft bruised purple, I found myself scrolling through old photos to stave off the rising anxiety. Images of laughter and impromptu adventures formed a tapestry of trust that felt almost foreign now. I stumbled upon a snapshot of us at the beach, Lily with her wild curls dancing in the wind, her laughter ringing like a melody that I could still hear faintly in the air. It was beautiful, and it temporarily dulled the chaotic thoughts racing in my mind. Yet, a sudden ping from my phone yanked me back to reality, and I instinctively glanced down to see that the ominous message had reappeared, just like it had before, "Hide." My breath hitched in my throat, and I felt a cold sweat prickle along my skin. In that moment, it wasn't the words that chilled me, it was the implication that whatever was sending these messages had returned, and this time, it was looking for more than just my attention. Feeling desperate, I called Lily, my heart pounding with a blend of dread and hope. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice a soft balm to my frayed nerves. I hesitated, the familiar anxiety clawing its way back, but I could feel her unwavering concern wrapping around me like a safety net. "No, it isn't," I finally admitted. And as I spilled my soul, describing the messages and the weight of my fear, a part of me feared she'd brush it off, that she'd think I was being melodramatic. Instead, she listened, unwavering. After a long silence, Lily replied softly, "We'll figure this out together. You're not alone in this." Just hearing her say that made a warmth bloom in my chest. Perhaps I had misjudged our connection, believing the heaviness in my heart had dimmed my light enough to distance us. But there. She was, steadfast and true, reminding me that not all shadows had to be faced alone. Over the next few days, we navigated this precarious situation together. We dived into threads of conversation, piecing together the cryptic messages that seemed to proliferate overnight. Lily encouraged me to document each one, treating them as clues in a puzzle. As we turned our fears into a project, our bond grew stronger. We spent nights on the phone, diving into the mystery, allowing it to infuse a sense of purpose that we both desperately craved. And then, one fateful night, as I lay in bed flipping through the accumulated screenshots, ready to drift into sleep, something unprecedented happened. My screen lit up, and the words that gripped my heart broke like the dawn cracking through the dark: "Hide. But not from what you think." Confusion swirled through me, the word but felt like a key unlocking something deeper. Hiding from what? Suddenly the messages felt less like threats and more like a guiding hand, steering me towards something unknown. As I filled with determination, I snapped a photo of the screen and sent it to Lily, who replied almost instantly, fired with excitement rather than fear. It's a clue. We need to figure out what this means. There was a long pause on my end as I considered the implications. What if this was the turning point? What if whatever darkness had clung to me now had turned itself into a riddle, daring us to explore rather than cower? As we brainstormed possible meanings, an idea began to take shape in my mind, a quirky venture through local urban legends, a path that could lead to scattered pieces of the puzzle hidden throughout our town. The notion that the world wasn't just void of shadows, but also alive with the stories of others, breathed a sense of exhilaration into my soul. We had started something larger than ourselves, twisting dread into a shared adventure and recalibrating our relationship with each word we scrawled over old maps, feeling like true detectives across a mosaic of vibrant stories waiting to be unveiled. Perhaps I was slowly embracing the shadows, not as a harbinger of despair, but as a canvas upon which new experiences could be painted. The messages weren't just warnings, at least, not entirely. They became gateways to an old friend and a reminder that even when darkness loomed, there was light to be found in unity, adventure, and courage. And as I shut my eyes that night, I held on to that thought, the thrill of the unknown blossoming within me, not as a threat but as an invitation, a chance to rewrite our story together, one hidden message at a time. The next morning greeted me with a hesitant light creeping through the curtains, softening the edges of the trepidation still clinging to me like a heavy mist. Instinctively, I reached for my phone, half expecting another cryptic message waiting for me, but this time there was nothing, just the dull maintenance of my usual notifications. The absence of alert from the screens around me felt oddly louder than any of the messages I had previously seen. As my caffeine-fueled thoughts began to swirl, I considered how I would address Lucy. She had been a pillar of strength throughout this bizarre ordeal, sharing her own fears and curiosities with me over late-night cups of tea. Together, we had spent countless hours unraveling the mysteries woven into those chilling notifications, our conversations bridging the gap between the surreal and the rational. "It's not over," I whispered to myself, a confession of my lingering anxieties, as I prepared to head to her apartment for our usual Saturday brunch ritual. The sun had risen to its rightful place in the sky, but a nagging sense of foreboding remained, reminding me that beneath the tranquil surface, there was an unsettling current waiting just to be recognized. When I arrived, Lucy was already seated at the table, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug as she gazed out at the colorful leaves dancing in the autumn breeze. There was a look of pensive serenity on her face, and for the briefest moment, I wished I could share that calmness. But as I slid into the chair across from her, I could feel the weight of the past few days clash against the warmth of her smile. "Hey, you," she said, her voice bright, "I was just thinking about how wild it was that we both got the same notification last night. Did you freak out too?" A laugh bubbled up from my throat that was more nervous than amused, yet I could see the sincerity in her eyes. "It's crazy, right? I mean, not just what it said, but how it makes you feel, like we're being roped into something much bigger than ourselves," I replied, glimpsing the unease that lurked behind her smile. With each shared moment, each comforting caress of friendship, I began to lose some of the tension that had tightened its grip on my chest. Over pancakes drizzled in syrup and steaming cups of tea, we ventured deeper into discussions about the messages, what they could possibly mean and how they seemed to weave in and out of our lives, like a narrative tether tying us both to something greater. The hours rolled by, merging laughter with serious contemplations, as we mapped out a series of possibilities. By the time we finished our brunch, a plan had begun to form, an exploration we were both willing to embark on. We would confront this strange phenomenon together, stepping beyond the comfort of our homes into the realm of the unknown, equipped only with our wits, a shared sense of adventure, and the lingering warmth of our connection. In the days that followed, we gathered intel, combed through our social media feeds for clues, and reached out to others who had experienced similar eerie messages, weaving a network of support that spanned far wider than we anticipated. Then one evening, as twilight wrapped the world in a shimmering whiff of mystery, we received a different kind of message. This one appeared on our phones with an urgency that pulled at the beads of fear and excitement strung within us. "Find the light." My heart raced at the implications. What did it mean, finding light? Was it a physical location or a metaphorical endeavor? Both Lucy and I felt the thrill of plunging into uncharted territory, an adventure where we would become co-authors of the story the universe had chosen to share with us. We centralized our efforts to the town's old library, a labyrinth of dusty tomes and forgotten relics that had fostered many youthful imaginations. There, beneath the worn shelves, countless lives had intersected with stories that lingered in the margins, a serene backdrop for our quest. I wandered into the musty aisles brimming with nostalgia, trying to interpret the message as I climbed the well-worn wooden stepladder toward a collection of novels hidden high above the lesser explored stacks. It was a slow and meaningful search, our hearts synchronized, tinged with an understanding that what we sought wasn't just an answer but a piece of ourselves amidst the chaos. It was Lucy who discovered it first, a small brass lamp hidden behind a thick volume of poetry, retreating silently from the world but undeniably beckoning us to turn it on. As the electricity coursed through its threads, a warm golden hue expelled shadows from the corners of the library, melting them away like whispers in the night. And it was in that light, amidst the stacks surrounding us like an embrace, that we felt a pulse of reassurance thrumming through our hearts. The messages had never been solely about warnings or reminders to hide, they had been guiding us toward the light, the very essence of connection, friendship, and courage to face whatever lay ahead. As I stood there, my fears unfurling like dried leaves in the breeze, I turned to Lucy, whose smile sparkled brighter than any flickering screen. We were no longer simply ghostly passengers caught in the web of fear, we had woven ourselves into a vibrant tapestry of camaraderie, ready to face whatever mysteries awaited us. The realization struck me profoundly, and as I closed my eyes in gratitude for her presence, I understood that this was just the beginning of a new adventure, a chance to embrace the unknown together, not as separate entities but as two hearts, one journey, united under the gentle warmth of the light we had found. In the days that followed, the world outside continued its rhythm, blissfully unaware of the small spark of light we had ignited in our own lives. I often felt the thrill of messages flickering across screens, but now they were no longer sentences of fear. Instead, they transformed into whispers of adventure, encouraging exploration anew. Perhaps the forthcoming challenges would come with shadows, but armed with the knowledge that even darkness could illuminate paths yet unknown, I felt more than ready. And with Lucy beside me, I realized we were not merely searching for answers. We were crafting a narrative of resilience and hope, one that welcomed and embraced the shadows, because sometimes, it was within those dark corners that the flickers of light just waited to be found. As I nestled down on that soothing evening, the comfort of the day wrapping around me like a tender embrace, my heart no longer raced with uncertainty. Instead, it thrummed steadily in a newfound harmony, a gentle cadence whispering that whatever came next would be worth every step taken. And perhaps, just perhaps, the next message would not carry an admonition to hide but an invitation to explore, breathe, and embrace this beautiful tapestry of existence we continued to weave together. The moment my brother Caleb handed me his phone, I felt an inexplicable chill settle in the pit of my stomach. "Could you check something for me? I think Jess might be hiding something," he said, his voice barely tinged with uncertainty. Jess had been Caleb's girlfriend for just over a year, and while I had always found her charming and intelligent, there was an underlying tension that seemed to cling to her whenever I was around. It was as if she had constructed an elaborate house of cards in her life, and I was about to be the wind that brought it all crashing down. I sat down on the couch, the familiar scent of fresh coffee and the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows creating a warm cocoon around me, but the gravity of the situation pulled my focus. I opened Caleb's messages, hoping to find some innocent indication of Jess's newfound secret instead of finding any wrongdoing. As I scrolled through conversations filled with typical banter, one unfamiliar name caught my attention. It belonged to a Casey, someone who seemed to take up an unexpected amount of Jess's time, nights spent studying together, late-night texts that were anything but casual. An uneasy feeling settled over me. The more I read, the more a picture of deceit began to form. I felt torn. Jess had always treated me kindly, had welcomed me into their shared world like a sister, yet here I was, caught in the web of someone else's potential infidelity. When Caleb's voice broke through my thoughts, asking what I found, all I could manage was a half-hearted shrug. Nothing, just some study group. But the unease lingered. Over the following days, I found myself looking at Jess through a different lens, noticing the small signs that now seemed glaring, her constant checks of her phone even when she was with Caleb, the way she smiled a little too brightly whenever someone else mentioned Casey. One rainy afternoon, I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. When Jess called me for a casual lunch, I found the courage to broach the subject in a light-hearted way, hoping to gauge her reaction without being accusatory. "So, how's your study group with Casey going?" I asked, letting the words hang in the air. For a moment, she froze, a fleeting shadow of panic crossing her features before her smile swiftly returned, though the tightness in her eyes betrayed her. "Oh, Casey? He's just a friend from class. You know how studying can get." There it was, the slight stutter in her tone and the way she looked away. My heart sank. I had to say something, confront her lies head on, but the thought of doing so felt like stepping into a minefield. I convinced myself to keep watching, to gather more evidence for Caleb. Days turned into weeks, and the sense of dread grew heavier, my conscience pulling me in two conflicting directions, one saying to protect my brother and the other warning me to respect Jess's space, the fragile veneer of our friendship hanging by a thread. Eventually, during a family dinner, I found myself sitting across from Jess, her laughter blending into the warm melodies of my parents' bantering. It highlighted the dissonance I felt, like a sour note in an otherwise pleasant song. Caleb nudged my elbow, an innocent gesture that echoed loudly in my mind, reminding me of the precarious balance I had to maintain. The moment finally arrived when Jess excused herself from the table to take a phone call outside. My brother watched her retreating figure, a faint smile on his lips, but I couldn't match his joviality. It was time to take a stand. I turned to him, my pulse racing, and said, "Hey, Caleb, can I talk to you for a second?" I dragged him to the quiet of the hallway, the soft hum of family chatter fading into the background. "I think Jess might be lying to you," I blurted out, my words tumbling over each other, fueled by relentless guilt and desperation. His expression shifted from casual to concerned, then to pained disbelief. "What do you mean?" he whispered, the weight of my accusation hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I hesitated, wrestling with my conscience, but the evidence amassed within me finally burst forth. I recounted my findings, how Jess's demeanor shifted, the text that felt all too personal, the way she avoided the topic when prompted. Caleb's face blanched, his mouth went dry as he processed my words. I immediately saw the doubt sketched across his face, the whipsaw of emotions flashing in his eyes, from denial to anger and finally to the cold, hard truth that lay just beneath the surface. Jess returned just in time to witness the storm brewing between the two of us. The atmosphere shifted palpably, and often the truth is that you don't need a hurricane to reveal how stormy the waters are underneath. A single ripple can cause the greatest waves. When she cornered us, she could sense the tension, her smile faltering, and in that moment, I felt the breath of regret freeze in my throat. The confrontation was swift and brutal, Jess unraveling before us like a fragile thread, her words spiraling into a defensive and contradictory mess. It had taken everything in me to voice the truth, but in the end, I merely felt hollow as Caleb grappled with the aftermath of my revelation. Jess defended her actions as innocent until proven guilty, caught in a lie but refusing to completely break down. Each attempt she made to regain his trust slipped further away, like sand through her fingers. When Caleb asked her about Casey, I could see hope fading in his eyes, replaced with an aching sense of betrayal. By the end of the night, Jess packed her things in a hurried, panicked frenzy, slamming the door of our home behind her, leaving a void that felt impossible to fill with laughter and light. It struck me how quickly a story could change, how slipping revelations could reshape not just lives but the very spaces they inhabited. Weeks passed, and the echoes of that confrontation lingered. Caleb and I lived amidst the silence of grieving for what was lost, both of us tiptoeing through the wreckage of a relationship that once felt solid and true. I thought I had captured a villain in Jess, yet I found myself in an unintended duel with my own integrity and the bonds of brotherhood. Conversations with Caleb were shorter, occasionally punctuated by awkward silences that left both of us feeling raw and exposed. I began to wonder if I had overstepped, if my loyalties to my brother had come at the cost of a friendship that might have merely needed a bit of time and honesty. It was a dangerous game to play, caught between being the good sibling and the potential destroyer of dreams. Yet, as my brother began to heal, slowly piecing together his heart, I learned that sometimes the hardest truths have to emerge to clear the air, no matter how painful. Caleb found solace in time spent with friends, rebuilding his foundation and exploring new paths, while Jess became a memory too volatile to unpack right now. Months later, as winter settled in, snow blanketing our world in peace, I found myself reflecting on that chaotic time. Unexpectedly, I received a text from Jess, nothing substantial, just an apology. It carried the weight of her unburdened heart, a message of acknowledgement that seemed to hum with a quiet sincerity. "I was wrong, Caleb deserves better, and I am sorry for everything." My chest tightened as I contemplated sending it to him. Would he even want to know? Would it open old wounds? In that moment, I realized that life's intertwined paths shape our journey. They twist and turn through relationships in ways we can't always foresee. Perhaps the conclusion lay in forgiveness, not just for Jess, but for me too, for flaws as we all do. With time, the shadows receded, and emotions transformed into memories, leaving us both a little more tender but a lot more resilient. Life continues to curve into unforeseen directions, but I cherish the lesson of honesty in relationships, the quiet understanding that sometimes being someone else's support means asking the hard questions, even if it feels like you're lost amidst the whispers of doubt. And that is where, stripped back to the essence of our shared humanity, we all linger, between mistakes and redemption, in the heart of being imperfectly human. As I reflect on how my journey unfolded, I can't help but recall all the little moments that led me to that fateful encounter with my brother's girlfriend. It had begun as a regular Saturday afternoon, sun-dappled and lazy, the kind where time felt infinite. I was tidying my small apartment, putting on a podcast that spiraled from true crime stories into the endless chatter of Reddit threads, a guilty pleasure I often indulged in while organizing my life. Somewhere in the background, the hosts debated a post titled "A Myth Asshole for Ruining My Brother's Relationship?" The words lingered in the air, resonating with my own bubbling thoughts. You see, my brother, Evan, had been dating Mia for nearly a year. At first glance, they seemed perfect for each other, their laughter echoing through family dinners. But as the months slinked by, little discrepancies began to prick at my intuition. I'd catch Mia giving evasive answers during simple conversations. If Evan asked her something seemingly innocent, she'd quickly change the subject or brush it off with a laugh that felt too forced. My protective instincts kicked in, and the more I observed, the more my unease mounted. One evening, I invited them over for dinner, eager to get a deeper glimpse into their relationship. The three of us sat around the wooden dining table, the aromatic smell of baked chicken wafting through the room. As Evan poured glasses of wine, I caught Mia's eyes darting toward her phone like a trapped bird seeking freedom. I tried to pull her into the conversation with stories of our childhood, hoping to bring a nostalgic warmth to the air. Yet, when I mentioned the time Evan tore his favorite t-shirt at the annual family picnic, I saw her brow furrow ever so slightly, and my stomach dropped. It seemed, in that fleeting moment, she had no idea what I was talking about. Intrigued, I pressed on, casually bringing up old family tales, noticing how her smile became increasingly strained. By dessert, she seemed little more than a perfect stranger sitting at my table. The evening wore on, laughter fading into polite smiles, and as the last plate was cleared, Mia excused herself. I was left with Evan, who looked so content, unaware of the unease that had tightened around my chest. I found myself grappling with a moral quandary. Did I bring it all up and risk ruining his happiness? Or did I quietly dismiss the nagging doubts festering inside me? Days turned into weeks, and the lingering doubt settled into my routine like a heavy quilt, suffocating and uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. Then I stumbled upon a post from a mutual friend on social media, a photo captioned with a location that made my heart race. Mia had claimed to be out with friends that day, but the photograph clearly showed her at a local cafe with someone I didn't recognize, a man, laughing and leaning in closer than friends should. That gut instinct ignited like a wildfire. I felt I owed it to Evan to confront Mia. The next Sunday, I was thrust into the role of an unwitting detective. I invited Mia over under the guise of wanting to hang out, my heart pounding as I collected my thoughts, preparing for what would unfold. We sipped tea in casual silence until the air thickened. I casually mentioned the photograph. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and I could feel every nerve ending in my body come alive with tension. "Oh, that was just a friend from college," she blurted, and I saw in her demeanor what I had feared, a slip, an inflection that rang hollow. "We were just catching up." It would have been simple to drop it there, to dismiss the sick feeling pooling in my gut, but something inside me made me push further. The moment stretched as we talked, dissecting her explanations, and with each feeble justification, her facade began to fray. I found myself caught in an emotional tempest, feeling as if I were standing on the precipice of betrayal from my brother, knowing full well that the truth I sought could lead to devastating consequences. In the end, my apprehension dissipated when Mia confessed, her voice shook, sincerity washing over her. "I didn't want to hurt Evan," she said, tears brimming. "But I felt trapped in our relationship. There's someone else, yes, I've been seeing him, and I thought if I avoided betrayal by lying, it wouldn't hurt him as much." There it was, raw and exposed. She had caught herself in the web of a lie, and the weight of it pressed hard against my chest. I now had the burden of this knowledge not only for myself but for Evan. When I eventually shared everything with him, I felt that peculiar mix of resolve and heartbreak, knowing the path forward was strewn with strife but also clarity. As he processed the news, I felt empathy anchoring me amidst the unfolding chaos. That day would mark the beginning of a slow healing for Evan, a journey filled with tears, and reassessment that eventually led to closure, but more importantly, a chance for him to reclaim his narrative. Reflecting on those events still evokes a cocktail of emotions within me: grief, anger, and ultimately, relief that truth settled in like a balm. Time would teach us lessons, and while I wrestle with the aftermath of having disrupted their lives, I hold on to one clear takeaway: love thrives on trust and honesty. Even as the shadows of uncertainty loom, I am thankful for the light that chased them away, reminding me of the importance of integrity in our ties. And poignantly, I found myself nestled within the web of imperfect humanity, each thread a testament to the resilience of our hearts. This is where I linger now, at the crossroads of relationships and honesty, learning to navigate my own role within life's beautiful, complex tapestry. As I stand at this crossroads, the days slowly unravel, each bringing its own share of contemplation and dialogue, not only with the people around me but also within the quiet corners of my mind. The initial chaos that my actions set in motion has settled into something softer, more contemplative, akin to the lingering echoes of a storm that has passed, leaving only the calm light of dusk in its wake. I find myself revisiting the conversations I had with my brother, Ethan, and Jess, the woman he was dating. She has since become a stranger, not for lack of connection but for the intricacies that emerged when the truth shattered the slightly gleaming facade we had shared. Every time I reminisce about that night, I remember the gentle hum of the ceiling fan above me, casting playful shadows on our faces as we sat around the dining table, the remnants of takeout strewn, forgotten, a faint aroma of spice lingering in the air. It was supposed to be an ordinary get-together, one of those fond reunions where laughter and teasing flew as easily and freely as the drinks. In hindsight, I understand it was those very moments that held the seeds of discontent, edged with secrets and suppressed whispers. The evening turned when I casually mentioned a conversation I had overheard a few weeks prior, settling into the comfort of familiarity. I didn't intend to spark anything dangerous, but when Jess's gaze faltered, a flicker of tension darting across her face, I recognized a vulnerability hidden beneath her polished exterior. I could feel it in my bones: something was off, as if I had stumbled onto an unseen fault line between friendship and honesty. My words became a mirror reflecting back not only her reaction but also the complexity of each of our lives that felt so simply woven together at first glance. The once warm smiles turned brittle as I sensed uncharted territory emerge, and my heart raced in response, caught in the thrall of worry and confusion. Was I the villain here? How had these simple words unleashed a storm I had barely understood? In the aftermath, Ethan's hurt echoed through the walls of our shared memories, changing their texture, creating waves that rippled through every interaction, leaving me grappling with my own lingering guilt. I had unintentionally stripped away the safety of their shared world, and for that moment, the world felt heavy with uncertainty, casting shadows that felt almost unbearably long. Yet, as time unfurled, I witnessed them begin to untangle their own narrative, seeking solace in honesty that transcended the initial hurt. Watching from a distance, I felt a shift. Ethan, brave and resilient, began to reclaim his agency, powerfully confronting the threads that had sought to bind him in silence. Jess, caught amidst the chaos, sought forgiveness and healing. Her armor had cracked, revealing vulnerabilities that she had hidden even from herself. It was beautiful, and painfully raw, to see two people who loved each other engage in this intricate dance of possibility and renewal. As for me, my perspective widened, becoming a reflective pool where I realized that love is not merely an idealistic construct but a battleground where truths and lies intertwine, a place where both light and shadow dwell. I became a witness to their vulnerability, harboring an understanding that while I had played a part in unearthing the lie that had woven through their relationship, the journey towards honesty was one they had to undertake themselves. I learned that the path to healing is never straight but often obscured by the fog of fear and hesitation, yet it held the promise of growth and restoration. Now, as I sit alone in quiet reflection, the air filled with the soft rustle of leaves outside my window, I understand the importance of navigating these murky waters. I've come to acknowledge that it is often the remnants of past mistakes that can lead us into brighter tomorrows, as we strike a delicate balance between holding on and letting go. Savoring the bittersweet experiences leads us to a deeper communion with our humanity, revealing that perhaps, in the end, we are defined not by our flaws but by our resilience in overcoming them. As I ponder this, I remind myself that even amidst uncertainty, love, raw, honest, and sometimes painful, thrives through the knowledge that we will stumble, yet in our stumbling lies the chance to rise anew. Here, nestled firmly in the fabric of our entwined lives, I find solace, realizing that the heartbeat of humanity, fraught with misunderstanding yet rich in love, will continue to guide us through the ever-evolving journey of connection. I never thought I'd gain clarity from a conversation that boiled down to a simple question: Am I the asshole for reminding my mom that she disappeared for 6 years? It all started on an ordinary Tuesday, just after my 22nd birthday, when I received a text from my mom, one that seemed to cascade through the silence we had established over time. "Can we talk?" The message read, punctuated with an ellipsis that left something unsaid, shrouded in tension. After everything, I wasn't sure what talking meant anymore. I'd spent too long trying to piece together the echoes of my childhood. The splintered memories of her absence were like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. She left when I was 14, without a note, without a sign. I remember spending countless nights pacing my bedroom, wrapping the arms of my favorite stuffed animal tighter around my chest as if it could absorb the sadness creeping under my skin, desperately waiting for the front door to creak open and reveal her to me, only, it never did. When she resurfaced 6 years later, it was an awkward reunion. She was different, and so was I. She floated in and out of my life, wearing an expression that oscillated between remorse and urgency, as if she were a ghost trying to tether herself to a world she had once inhabited. We meandered through awkward lunches and tentative conversations, but the weight of what had happened still hung between us like an unspoken wound, raw and unhealed. My friends advised me to make peace with her, to forgive and forget, but the truth was, forgiveness felt like an uphill battle often punctuated by waves of resentment. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching fireflies flicker like tiny memories in the dusk, I felt a surge of boldness. The conversation had ebbed and flowed, and my mom's laughter was light, yet it triggered a memory I thought I could gloss over. "You know, it's strange," I said, almost tentatively, "that you were just gone for all those years." The moment the words spilled from my lips, everything shifted. Her laughter froze, the carefree late summer air turned thick as she turned to me, wide-eyed with surprise. I had never directly confronted her about disappearing, and maybe that was the mistake I had made all along. The evening spiraled into an emotional chasm, her defense mechanisms kicking in with a vehemence I had never witnessed before. She insisted I didn't get it, that nobody understood what she went through, her voice rising and falling like a tumultuous sea. I watched her struggle to articulate what I knew she couldn't, a deep-rooted pain that bubbled beneath her surface. But what I had said pierced through the surface tension of our fragile newfound relationship, rendering her defenses useless. I felt like I had triggered a dormant storm inside her, and while part of me anguished over this, the other fired with a stubborn insistence to be heard. "You left me," I whispered, and with that, the tremor of truth hung palpably in the air. I wasn't sure if I was asking for an apology or for her to acknowledge my pain, but it seemed to matter less than the cathartic release of finally expressing my resentment. After what felt like hours of silence, she finally spoke. "I'm so sorry," her voice fractured like glass, each word laced with the weight of regret. As we both sat in the quiet aftermath, I realized that this moment was a turning point for us, a tentative bridge that flickered with the promise of new foundations. This wasn't an easy reconciliation. I still wrestled with the anger, the abyss of loneliness stretched before me, but it became clear that she, too, was trapped in her own reservoir of regret. Our past was marred, yet the possibility of healing was glimmering at the horizon. Weeks rolled by, each conversation layered with new understanding, moments where I reminded her how difficult her absence was and the emotional scars it left, but she met me with transparency, peeling back her trauma like layers of an onion. Eventually, we crafted a bond riddled not just with apologies but with a shared willingness to confront the realities of our intertwined lives. Though the past couldn't be rewritten, it became clearer that I didn't want to dwell on it forever. Instead, I aimed to look towards what lay ahead and how we could forge a future from the ashes of our fragmented past. In an unexpected twist of fate, my initial question transformed into a catalyst for healing. I found compassion for my own pain, an awareness that understanding can twist miracles out of memories that haunt and separate. In the end, as we walked hand in hand one summer evening, I quietly realized I was not the asshole. I had simply needed to remind her of the truth to reclaim my own narrative and, perhaps, hers alongside it. As I wrap up this story, I can't help but reflect on how dramatically things can evolve. For anyone who stumbles upon this, if you've found yourself in a similar position, don't shy away from the hard truths. Sometimes the path to healing is paved with discomfort and confrontation, and that's not just okay, it can be transformative. Update: a few months later, we still have our ups and downs, but we talk regularly. We even plan family dinners now. It's a work in progress, but losing her taught me the value of open communication. Sometimes, reminding someone of their old self is precisely what you both need to move forward. As I sank into the familiar comfort of my worn-out armchair, I couldn't help but smile at how unconventional our journey had been. In the months since that pivotal moment, a conversation that unearthed years of unresolved pain, I felt like I was traversing a landscape continuously covered in fresh snow, each step unraveling new layers of understanding that had remained buried for so long. My mom and I had made significant strides, but the relationship was far from perfect. We had our fair share of awkward silences and unresolved grievances that seemed to loom over dinner tables like unsettling guests who just wouldn't leave. Yet each time we gathered, a collection of mismatched forks and plates heaped with homemade pasta or tacos, we found ourselves leaning a little more towards one another, laughter puncturing the tension that would have trapped us once. I remember one evening when we decided on Mexican, the warm kitchen filling with the spicy scents of sautéed peppers and garlic. Our conversation drifted to lighter territory. My mom made a joke about how many cooking shows I had watched. I couldn't help but tease back about her questionable interpretation of a taco. She laughed, her face lighting up as she recalled how I had always criticized her less than authentic attempts in the kitchen. The ease of it all was beautiful and yet fragile, like the last leaves of autumn trembling on the branches before winter fully set in. But amid these sporadic bursts of joy, we would still occasionally trip over the jagged stones of unresolved tension. There were days when the memories of her disappearance loomed heavily in the air, unspoken, a reminder of discomfort hanging like a fog. While we made efforts to engage in deeper conversations about the past, she often glossed over the harder parts, and I had to remind myself, sometimes in frustration, that healing doesn't always mean confronting everything at once. I learned this not just from our interactions but from conversations with friends who had similarly tangled familial relationships. Each interaction became a delicate balancing act as I tried to weigh my need for transparency against her apparent aversion to confronting certain aspects of her absence. But deep down, I felt there was a possibility, a gentle pulse of hope amid the chaos, that we could find a way through it together. One rainy afternoon, a few months into our renewed relationship, I was sifting through old family photos while dusting the shelves in my bedroom. I uncovered an image of us, taken during a camping trip when I was about 10. In the picture, we were grinning widely, her hair wild and tousled by the wind, a soft sunlight draping us with warmth. I hesitated, sensing an urge to share it with her, wanting to evoke the nostalgia we avoided, but anxiety wrestled at my throat. What if it prompted an uncomfortable conversation? What if I opened up a door that was best left closed? In the end, a quiet determination won out. I forwarded the image to her, and my heart raced as I waited for her response, uncertain of what would surface. A few moments later, my phone buzzed, a simple reply from Mom. I remember this day. We should go camping again sometime. The words settled around me like a gentle embrace. In that small, unexpected moment, I realized how essential it was to continue fostering these connections, however tentative. Each memory shared, each laugh exchanged, and even the silent contemplations acted as glue, mending a bond that had once frayed to its breaking point. So we planned several family outings, trips to the park, impromptu movie nights, and yes, even that camping trip, which turned out to be a beautiful disaster with an overzealous raccoon raiding our snacks. Each stumble, each genuine laugh, further loosened the decades of hurt, allowing us avenues of genuine connection. Life isn't simply about resolving conflicts, I discovered, it's about embracing the raw, unfiltered moments of humanity, allowing them to reshape your understanding of each other without losing sight of where you both began. Reflecting on these experiences, I chuckled at how naive I had once been, thinking that confronting my mom about her previous disappearance would be the master key unlocking a perfect relationship. The truth was, we humans seem more like a patchwork quilt made of an array of fabric scraps, each piece significant in its imperfection, stitched together by our experiences, laughter, and the love that survived the storms. And now, as I stood amidst the remnants of our initial unresolved conflicts, I felt a quiet pride swell in my heart. We were moving forward, not flawlessly, but rather with intention and openness, and that's what mattered most. Update: it's been nearly a year since I sent that first photo. My mom finally decided to visit my place for the holidays, a huge step for us both. We tackled all the chaos together, barely burnt cookies, holiday songs we forgot the words to, and moments filled with laughter where unspoken truths only led us closer, like the final stitches in our newly knitted bond. There's still room for improvement, reflections on the past yet to unfold, but although we still have our ups and downs, I hold on to the sheer thrill of discovering that reminding someone of their worth can also truly mean reminding yourself. The holiday season that year felt almost surreal, like stepping into a storybook where you get to rewrite the characters and their fates. As my mom arrived at my apartment, the usual nervous tension that would rise in my chest was strangely absent, replaced instead by a flutter of excitement. She came with a suitcase, yes, but it was filled with more than just clothes. It was packed with a hefty dose of hope. We started off small, greeting each other with hesitant smiles that quickly warmed into embraces that longed for connection. We slid into the kitchen, a realm both familiar and foreign as we attempted to recreate our old family traditions. I remember eyeing the kitchen timer and thinking about how I had to remind her it was okay to laugh at our mistakes, instead of crying over them, like before. The cookies were hilariously imperfect, the kind that would make even the worst baking show contestants proud, yet we tried them anyway, laughing over the half-burnt edges and the slight bitterness of too much cinnamon. As we peeled away the layers of holiday chaos around us, our conversations began to unfurl like the delicate branches of a blooming tree, cautiously at first, but blooming all the same. We spoke of her absence without wading through bitterness. We spoke of my childhood without the weight of unresolved shadows. Each word felt like a brushstroke painting a clearer picture of two flawed and fragile beings who found a way back to each other. The moments were punctuated by snatches of holiday songs, our voices blending in harmony and discord, with the lyrics evading us but our spirits dancing freely. One evening, as we curled up on the couch watching old family videos, tiny glimpses into a world that felt both distant and achingly close, I caught her looking at me, a reflection of tenderness and vulnerability in her eyes. She softly admitted she regretted the years lost, yet I saw a flicker of something else, an understanding that our shared laughter and love had the power to bridge even the deepest divides. Those unspoken truths seemed to shimmer in the air between us, invisible threads weaving a tapestry of renewed trust. She expressed gratitude for my patience, which felt oddly reversed. My heart was grateful too, but for her presence, for her willingness to try anew. Each conversation, each short-lived tiff was a reminder that we were slowly threading together the fragments of our old selves with the new ones we were forging. Evenings turned into long discussions about dreams and aspirations, the soft glow of fairy lights glittering like possibilities in the air. Over dinner, we shared stories of our past and hopes for the future, anchoring our relationship in the open air of vulnerability. I felt a profound sense of comfort, her laughter filling the gaps of silence that had once felt like chasms. Sure, we weren't perfect, and perhaps we never would be, but we were learning to navigate this intricate dance of togetherness again. It was all still a work in progress, but as that holiday faded into memory, something undeniably beautiful emerged, a new rhythm that promised growth, however imperfect it might be. I realized that our bond was like those cookies we made, no longer pristine, but bursting with character, sweetness, and the warmth of shared experiences. It was deeply flawed, yet somehow, perfect in its own way. Reflecting on our journey, I understood that confronting the past was more than just a burden, it was a gift, and through those difficult conversations and tender moments, we both found a semblance of peace in the chaos. This tumultuous journey had changed us profoundly, but as I glanced at my mom, now more a friend than a figure of authority, I embraced the uncertainty of our future, knowing we were weaving a story that was all our own. I thought family dinners were supposed to be a happy time, a sanctuary where laughter echoed against the walls and stories were shared over hearty meals. But for us, those evenings had morphed into something altogether different, shadows lurking at the edges of our conversations, wrapping our interactions in unspoken tension. My name is Clara, and I've been married to Tom for 6 years. We have a 5-year-old daughter named Ruby, and while I consider ourselves a loving family, it has become impossible to ignore the growing chasm between Tom's parenting style and my own. I often found myself biting my tongue as I watched him joke with Ruby, unraveling crucial lessons about respect and boundaries into playful exchanges that sometimes skirted a little too close to mockery for my liking. I remember feeling that knot in my stomach every time I saw Tom dismiss her feelings, like the time she fell off her new bike and cried, only for him to ruffle her hair, laughing, saying she was being drama queen. It was that laughter that made me feel like I was caught in some kind of silent storm. Did he really believe it was all a joke? Surely, parenting requires more than a punchline. After months of internal wrestling, trying to bridge our views, I decided, after a particularly difficult week where it felt like every interaction we had ignited a small brushfire between us, that it was time to have an intervention, but one that wouldn't involve an audience. My plan was simple: gather a few close family members who shared my concerns and sit Tom down. The day of the intervention, my heart raced. We hosted the dinner in our cozy living room, filled with the familiar scent of my grandmother's lasagna wafting through the air, an ambrosial comfort I hoped would alleviate the tension. I watched him as he entered, a radiant smile on his face and an easy banter with Ruby. For a fleeting moment, I almost doubted my decision. How would he react to these loved ones sitting there, ominously quiet, gauging his every word? The evening began with laughter and light fare. But I could sense the shift when I introduced the topic with tentatively kind words about how much we all loved Ruby and wanted the best for her. Tom's smile flickered. I was met with a defensive posture, and soon, my family felt the air change as they echoed my concerns. Tom, we've all noticed that sometimes you just brush off her feelings. Each word felt like a landed blow, and I could see his expression shifting from taken aback to outright hurt. As voices intensified, I could feel the thick cloud of resentment settling between us, swirling in my gut. I'd never meant for it to feel like an attack. It should have felt like a caring moment, but watching Tom's eyes narrow, his lips tighten, I wished I could erase the entire evening. What had I done? The room grew quiet, the sound of my own heart pounding dangerously loud in my ears. I could see Tom blinking back something, anger, sadness, or perhaps confusion. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor like nails on a chalkboard, and headed out to the patio. I followed, a mix of dread and regret crashing over me. Was I being an asshole? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He stood against the railing, the moonlight casting a soft glow on his profile. I just want to be a fun dad, Clara, he said, his tone flat but revealing a deeper vulnerability. I didn't know there was a right way to parent. With that, I plunged into an honest dialogue instead of confrontation, revealing my fears of Ruby growing up leniently, of becoming someone who couldn't respect boundaries. As the night unfurled, we both found ourselves sharing more than just grievances. We uncovered fears, doubts we'd both carried throughout our marriage. I think it was then that a shift occurred, allowing us to reach homemade understandings of what it meant to raise our little girl. By the time midnight rolled around and the stars twinkled like distant lanterns overhead, we had come to an agreement. Tom promised to be more mindful of Ruby's feelings, while I vowed to ensure my approach balanced firmness and compassion. There were tears, hugs, and an ache that transformed into quiet laughter, dispelling the earlier tension. Weeks later, we saw noticeable change, not just in Tom's interactions with Ruby, but in how we communicated overall. It wasn't perfect and won't ever be, but now we could openly discuss boundaries, emotions, and even the occasional disagreement, something I'd craved since the beginning. I remember laying in bed that night, watching Tom lose himself in his dreams, not having resolved everything but feeling as if the weight of our misunderstanding had shifted, loosening its grip. It was a step forward, and though we still navigated the stormy seas of parenthood, the conversation gave me hope. As I write this, narrating the poignant moments that brought us closer, I can't help but wonder how many couples sit with their own trepidations beneath familiar stars, all needing just a little intervention of their own to make love thrive amid the chaos. Yet, despite the tentative peace we found in the quiet of our shared space, the feeling of unresolved tension never truly faded, resting just beneath the surface of our conversations. In the days that followed, I could sense the fragility of our relationship. It was like walking on a tightrope stretched high above the chaos of life, our very balance teetering on the edge of unspoken words. I started to find comfort in the routine of our days, the morning rituals of coffee brewing, the sweet scent of pancakes sizzling on a Sunday morning, the soft laughter of our kids echoing through the house while Tom and I exchanged fleeting glances, each one heavy with unarticulated thoughts. Some nights, after the kids drifted off to sleep, I would lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if what we had done was sufficient. Had we truly bridged the gap that had grown between us? Or were we merely placing a bandage over a wound that had yet to heal? Then came the day I found myself sitting in a small coffee shop, fingers wrapped around a warm mug, staring at my phone as I scrolled through a thread on r/Ida about a woman who had confronted her partner about their parenting. I hadn't planned on reading it, I just needed something to occupy my mind while I waited for a friend. But as the words unfolded on the screen, each confession, each struggle resonated deep within me. The comments decried her actions, some labeling her an asshole for creating unnecessary conflict. Others championed her courage, arguing that sometimes the hard conversations needed to happen to invoke change. I closed my eyes and imagined the context, bodies tense with unspoken frustration, a family dinner morphed into a culinary battlefield, emotions laid bare like tender flesh on display. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a real portrayal of what I had experienced, a realization that I wasn't alone in my thoughts, that perhaps I had inadvertently become a part of something larger. Arriving home later that day, armed with new perspectives but still clinging to the husk of my previous fears, I found Tom in the living room, a symphony of plastic toys littering the floor, the kids' laughter filling every corner. I felt a surge of gratitude for those moments, yet apprehension clawed at me from the inside. whispering that our home was both a sanctuary and a battleground. As we settled in for dinner, I picked my words carefully, wanting to engage but withholding a little out of compassion for both of us. I asked Tom how he felt about the kids' evolving behaviors, whether he noticed any shifts in their interactions. His brows furrowed as he chased a piece of broccoli around his plate, a clear sign of internal reflection. "Sometimes, I worry I'm not doing enough," he admitted, the weight of his vulnerability striking a chord in me. "I know the kids are learning from us, but what if I'm just showing them all the wrong things?" As I watched him struggle, my heart ached at the vivid realization of his fears mirroring my own. And just like that, what began as a conversation about our children morphed into us slowly unpacking the expectations we had of each other as partners and as parents, the insecurities revealing themselves line by line. By the end of the meal, we were leaning closer, sharing laughter punctuated with confessions of self-doubt. It felt exhilarating, as if the heaviness of our situation had transformed into something lighter, a buoyancy infused into the atmosphere of our home. Several days later, we found ourselves sitting at the edge of our bed, the dim light of the nightstand casting a warm glow around us as I carefully broached the subject of another intervention of sorts, one that could involve family, a potential gathering of our in-laws and nearest friends to discuss parental roles in a supportive circle. Tom was hesitant at first, reflecting on the past dismissals and misunderstandings we had both endured, but our children's chaotic tendencies soon became the deciding factor. "I don't want to keep pretending we have it all figured out," he agreed softly, the resolve growing between us. "If it helps us, and them, to talk through this, then let's do it." So we did. We arranged for a small gathering that weekend, inviting only those who felt like pillars of our lives, supportive grandparents eager to lend advice and seasoned friends who had navigated similar waters. The night approached with a mix of excitement and anxiety fluttering in the pit of my stomach, and as they began to arrive, I could feel an electrifying energy dance through our home. In the warm embrace of friendly faces, we shared stories filled with laughter and also moments filled with stark reality, unveiling vulnerabilities as a collective group. Conversations laced with compassion drew forth advice, sparking lively discussions that felt refreshing and raw. I discovered that most of us were grappling with the same trials, the weight of expectations sometimes feeling like a heavy cloak we wore unwillingly. And it hit me, this sense of community was what I had craved, not just for my husband and me, but for all of us, feeding into the notion that parenting, like any venture, thrived in the laughter and wisdom shared among friends and family. As the night lingered on, we encircled one another in a way that transformed the situation from an intervention into a celebration of unity. Toasts and cheers echoed through the night as our children fell asleep, the gentle hum of laughter wrapping around them like a lullaby. And as the evening wound down, Tom and I found ourselves seated on the porch under a sprawling moon, the kind of night that felt expansive and eternal. We reflected on the beauty of the conversations and the progress we had made, not just within ourselves but as a couple willing to face the tumult of parenting hand in hand. Now, as I sit here sharing this journey, I reflect on how our night of vulnerability turned into newfound strength. The intervention had morphed into an act of love, revealing that within the chaos of life and the challenges of parenting, our love could still bloom amid all the uncertainty. We may not have it all figured out, but we no longer bore the responsibility of figuring it out alone. As the days turned into weeks, I could feel the fabric of our family life begin to knit itself back together. It wasn't an overnight transformation, rather, it was a slow, deliberate weaving of understanding and partnership. The mornings were still hectic, with our toddler, Max, bursting into our room with the enthusiasm of a small tornado, demanding breakfast and cartoon time before the sun had fully peeked over the horizon. Yet, during those chaotic moments, Tom and I leaned into each other more, sharing exasperated glances that spoke volumes without a word. We learned to tag team the morning madness, with me preparing the scrambled eggs while he poured the milk, together wrangling Max's unpredictable energy. We started finding humor in the fray, laughing off the days when breakfast ended with more cereal on the floor than in his belly, allowing ourselves the grace to be imperfect. In the evenings, we would sit on the worn-out couch, the remnants of our day still hanging in the air, as I would share the snippets of my workday, and he would recount absurd conversations with coworkers that made even the most mundane tasks sound like adventure tales. It was in these moments that I felt the walls we had built around our frustrations begin to crumble, allowing laughter and openness to seep through the cracks. I began to see Tom not just as my husband, but as my companion in this wild journey of parenthood, a navigation through laughter and chaos, mistakes, and small victories. One Saturday, with the sun warming the world outside, we planned a family outing to the local park, Our first trip where we both felt equipped to handle Max's energetic bursts together. Tom and I held hands on the way, a small symbol of our resolve amidst the complexities. We shared the simple joy of watching Max run unabashedly toward the playground, his laughter echoing against the lush backdrop of summer. That afternoon was punctuated by sticky popsicles and spontaneous races, and with every shared experience, I felt the uncertainties of our earlier days start to fade into a warm, comforting glow. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, I turned to Tom, who was grinning as he swung Max into the air. It struck me then that our intervention had not only unveiled the cracks in our communication, it had also ignited a deeper understanding of what we could accomplish as a team. It was about pride, shedding the notion that we had to bear our struggles silently, and embracing the messy, beautiful experience of parenthood together. That evening, lying in bed with the laughter and chatter of our lively boy still echoing in my heart, I reflected on everything we had faced. Sure, the journey wasn't perfect, and I knew moments of frustration might still come. Like any couple grappling with the weight of parenting, we'd have stumbles. Yet, we were now armed with somehow a clearer perspective. The intervention hadn't been a merely talking it out session. It had forged an unspoken pact that we would continue nurturing our relationship alongside our role as parents. Our love would not be a casualty of life's demands, but rather a partner in this beautiful, layered tapestry we were creating together. As I lay there, feeling the gentle rhythm of Tom's breath next to me, I reached for my phone to journal my thoughts. I didn't want to forget this feeling, the comfort of knowing he was on my side, that together we were ready to face whatever life tossed our way, however clumsy or chaotic it might be. And in the quiet hum of the night, beneath a blanket of stars, I couldn't shake the feeling that this very moment, marked by vulnerability and hope, was a chapter in our story that I'd always cherish, a reminder that amidst the challenges, love was our anchor. In this swirling world of parenting and partnership, I've come to realize that it's not about having every answer figured out, but rather dwelling in the uncertainty together, trusting that our willingness to communicate would continue to thread our hearts closer. As I drifted off to sleep, a soft smile danced on my lips. Perhaps it was true what they often say, the best conversations often begin from the most unexpected places, and sometimes, in navigating the storm, you find that you're creating not just a loving household, but a depth of connection that makes the journey worthwhile. I've always prided myself on being a generous person, but the last few months have turned that belief on its head, and now, I find myself questioning my own values. My girlfriend, Rachel, and I had been together for just over a year when she broached the subject of her kids needing cars. Now, let me clarify, Rachel has 2 children from a previous marriage, Jenna, who is 15, and Max, who is 13. From the moment I met them, I felt an instant bond. Jenna had this fierce spirit, often caught between her childhood and looming adulthood, while Max was a whirlwind of energy, always looking to make people laugh. Sharing time with them was pure joy. Yet, as Rachel's kids got older, the conversations inevitably shifted to the need for independence. They wanted their own rides to school, friends' houses, and extracurricular activities. It was an ordinary Thursday when Rachel casually said, "You know, I've been thinking the kids really need cars to be more independent. Wouldn't it be great if we could pick something up for them?" At first, I chuckled, thinking she was joking. Surely, she didn't expect me to dive into a discussion about buying 2 cars just like that. But when I saw the look on her face, half serious, half hopeful, I realized this was no lighthearted suggestion. I could feel the knot tightening in my stomach as I recalled my own struggles. I was still paying off student loans and saving to start a life of my own. I hesitated, my mind racing through various possibilities, trying to balance my own financial responsibility with the desire to support Rachel and her family. The conversation became heated, but I remained calm. "Rachel, I love your kids, but I can't afford to buy them cars. It's just not realistic for me," I explained, choosing my words with care. She seemed taken aback, disappointment settling in her eyes. "I thought we were in this together," she said softly, and I felt an unwelcome sting of guilt. It wasn't just the idea of cars, it was the unspoken tension between a partner who wanted to share burdens and a guy who was barely keeping his head above water. Over the following weeks, the tension lingered. I noticed subtle changes in Rachel's demeanor. She became quieter, often lost in thought. On one occasion, while driving back from a family dinner, Jenna asked casually if I was going to buy them cars. I felt a sharp pang in my heart, not wanting to disappoint her but also knowing how strained my finances were. "It's complicated, Jenna," I replied, hoping to deflect. The laughter we used to share felt overshadowed by unspoken expectations and misunderstandings. Around this time, I took a hard look at myself and the relationship. I adored Rachel, and these kids meant the world to me, but it seemed I was inadvertently stepping into roles I wasn't ready for. I loved that Rachel envisioned a future where we united our families, but I had to be cautious about my own needs too. I chose to clear the air. "Rachel," I said one evening, taking her hand. "I care about you and your kids, but I also have to think about my financial goals. I'm not saying I won't help out in other ways, like giving rides or supporting them, but I can't commit to buying them cars." As I confessed my frustrations, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Rachel listened quietly, her expression shifting from disbelief to understanding. "I get it," she said finally, her voice softening. "Sometimes I forget you're still figuring things out for yourself." I could sense the relief in her voice when we turned the corner, leaving anger and disappointment behind. From that point forward, our relationship evolved. I started finding ways to help Jenna and Max without putting myself in financial jeopardy. We worked on small projects together, and I even taught them how to save up for things they wanted. Months later, I received a message from Rachel that made my heart swell. "The kids are working on their savings for cars. I think they've adopted your advice," she wrote, and I couldn't help but smile at the thought of them taking initiative. As we sat together that night, reminiscing over our journey, it became clear that we had come a long way. Though my situation hadn't changed much financially, I was at peace knowing we had built a stronger bond through honesty and support. Reflecting on it all, I found comfort in the notion that relationships aren't about merely giving, they're about growing together through adversity. I had feared being seen as selfish, but in the end, what transpired reaffirmed a truth: it's important to recognize one's own limits and communicate openly. I was still part of their lives, just in a different role. And as I fell asleep that night, I felt grateful for the love we had cultivated amid uncertainty, looking forward to all the moments yet to come. Update: a few weeks later, Rachel and I sat down with Jenna and Max to discuss plans for their first car. Instead of just handing them cash, we organized a small family project, painting and refurbishing an old car Rachel's parents had. The kids were ecstatic and learned invaluable skills throughout the process. Watching them work on something they could own ignited a sense of pride in them, but more importantly, it strengthened our bond as a family. In the end, it was about much more than just the cars. It was a lesson in responsibility, independence, and support that we would all carry forward. As the days turned into weeks, our little project blossomed into something more than just a car refurbishment. It became a way for Jenna and Max to understand the value of hard work and teamwork, lessons that would follow them into adulthood. The garage was filled with a blend of laughter and the occasional argument over color choices, tools, and who was in charge of what task. I found myself laughing more than I had in years, feeling like a part of something bigger as I watched Rachel cheer them on, wiping her hands on an old rag and beaming with pride. One Saturday, I suggested that we decorate the trunk with positive affirmations. Each kid could choose a quote that inspired them. Jenna picked "Believe in yourself," while Max, still a bit of a jokester, went with "I fixed it, so I own it." Rachel and I scrambled to find some old paint and brushes, and soon the trunk of the car emblazoned with their chosen words became a family masterpiece. The act of creating something that was truly theirs, a canvas on wheels, made Jenna and Max light up in ways that store-bought gifts never could. I remember one afternoon, after splashing paint around and making ridiculous faces while trying to channel my inner artist, Jenna turned to me with her bright blue eyes shining. "Will you help us do this again someday?" she asked, her voice earnest. I nodded, caught up in the moment. "Absolutely. This can be the first of many projects. We'll build cars, tree houses, or even go-karts, whatever you can think of." The commitment struck me as I spoke. The weight of my words settled in my chest, but it also felt electric, like I was weaving threads into our growing fabric of family. As the weeks continued to pass, we worked diligently, putting in time every weekend, replacing parts, and learning about the engine. I took on the heavier, more technical parts while Rachel guided the kids through the finer points of sanding and painting. Each task was a chance for Jenna and Max to ask questions, and for us to share stories of our own youthful follies, like the time I managed to get my first car stuck in a mud pit because I thought four-wheel drive meant you could drive anywhere. One evening, while we cleaned up after a particularly messy painting session, I was surprised to see a glimmer of uncertainty appear in Jenna's eyes. She had always been the more confident of the two, but tonight, something was off. "Are we doing it wrong?" she muttered, glancing at the splatters of paint that dotted the ground, some bold strokes that had landed on her shirt. It struck me then just how important this whole experience was to her. If the car didn't turn out perfect, Would that mean we had failed some unspoken test? I knelt down beside her, resting my arms on my knees. What do you think? I asked gently. Does it feel like we're working together? Are you having fun? She frowned for a moment, staring at the paint on her shirt and considering. Yeah, but the car needs to look perfect. Jenna, I said softly, life isn't about being perfect. It's about learning, growing, and having fun along the way. I watched as the words sank in, her expression slowly shifting toward relief and understanding, like the clouds lifting after a storm. Finally, the day came when we would unveil the refurbished car. We had all worked tirelessly, and the anticipation electrified the air as we gathered in the driveway for the big reveal. The sun shone down, catching the bright colors that adorned the car's surface in a way that made it look almost magical. Rachel stood beside me, her hand clasped in mine, her eyes glistening with excitement. Jenna and Max stood in front of the vehicle, their faces a mixture of disbelief and sheer joy, and as they reached out to touch their creation, I felt a surge of pride that ran deeper than I expected. Jenna joined Max in jumping up and down, squealing with happiness, and Rachel and I exchanged a glance, a silent confirmation of what we had built together, not just in terms of the car but within our family unit. I knew this was a moment they would remember, a fragment of time marked by laughter, creativity, and the unwavering bond we shared. Later, as we took turns behind the wheel on a quiet street, what struck me wasn't just the shiny paint or the engine purring, it was the way Jenna and Max discussed their plans for their driving future, each word a reflection of their blossoming maturity and sense of responsibility. I couldn't help but smile, thinking back to the conflict I had initially faced regarding whether or not I should buy them cars. The struggle had been real, but what we gained was immeasurable. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a sense of fulfillment wash over me, a warmth that spread from my chest to my fingertips. In teaching them the value of ownership and effort, I found that I was learning alongside them. Suddenly, our pastime projections morphed into a bonding experience, a way for Rachel and I to not only build cars but to build a family, brick by cherished brick. A week later, I received a message from an old coworker who wanted to update me about a job opening. The idea of returning to work jostled around in my brain, but I barely thought about it. Something deeper was stirring within me. The realization that I didn't need a high-paying job to feel fulfilled came to me like a whisper. I had discovered a different way to be present, engaged, and genuinely happy. Although our yard was filled with laughter from our car projects, I had also conjured an understanding that family was not just defined by blood, but by the memories we created together. Several months later, as our car adventures continued to unfold, Jenna and Max decided they wanted to do something special for Rachel and me. One afternoon, they surprised us with a picnic in the park, complete with sandwiches and homemade cookies that had some very creative, but slightly chaotic icing. We laughed as they took charge of the basket, and as we settled down beneath a tree, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. As I watched the kids run around, their laughter a melody of joy, I realized that I would never trade these moments for material things. I might not have given them cars without conditions at first, but I had given them the tools to navigate life more effectively, which would prove to be far more valuable in the long run. Reflecting on everything, I realized that though my initial hesitation stemmed from wanting to be a responsible adult rather than a flashy type, it had led to something far more profound, and although I would probably always be the one saying, "Let's paint the trunk," I had also become the dad who could tell a joke, share genuine pieces of wisdom, and make memories that would last a lifetime. Sometimes, I would hear Jenna and Max reminiscing about our adventures, and I couldn't help but feel that we were building not just a family of the future but a legacy, one filled not just with cars but with the cherished stories of our lives. As the days passed, our weekends became filled with laughter, paint splatters, and the smell of motor oil, a unique blend of chaos and joy that transformed our garage into a makeshift workshop and a haven for memories. Rachel would often send me gentle nudges of encouragement as I attempted to wield a wrench while Jenna and Max handled the power tools with surprising finesse. Each time they'd succeed in fastening a bolt or sanding down a rough edge, their smiles would widen, the joy resonating in their eyes as if they'd just conquered a mountain. These moments were powerful reminders of how quickly they were growing up, and each project fueled my desire to be more present and supportive in their lives. One evening, as dusk began to settle in, we found ourselves sprawled out on an old blanket we'd tossed in the trunk while we waited for paint to dry. The kids shared their dreams. Jenna wanted to travel the world and write stories of her adventures, while Max, always the jokester, mused about becoming a famous comedian. As I listened, I realized that this experience was about more than just cars. It was forging a foundation for their ambitions and aspirations. Weeks later, the old car began to transform. It was no longer just a rusted frame, it became a vibrant representation of teamwork, laughter, and shared sweat. We painted it in bold blues and cheerful yellows, mixing colors as if each swirl of paint was a thread in the tapestry of our newly formed family. Friends and neighbors stopped by, often asking if they could lend a hand, turning our small project into a community affair. One Saturday afternoon, while the kids and I painted the hood, Rachel appeared with freshly baked cookies, and her eyes sparkled with pride as she watched us. I felt a warmth in my chest knowing that I was no longer just a boyfriend to her. I had evolved into a partner and a father figure, nurturing the lives around me with kindness, patience, and a whole lot of love. When the project finally reached completion, the sense of accomplishment was palpable. The day we unveiled the finished car was nothing short of magical. Jenna and Max jumped up and down, their faces lit with astonished delight as we took a family picture beside the newly restored vehicle. However, with this joy came an underlying anxiety rooted in my mind. Would they expect the same kind of effort and commitment forever? What if life became too busy, or what if the bond we had nurtured began to unravel? I discussed these uncertainties with Rachel one quiet evening when the kids were snugly tucked in. We illuminated the room with soft light, a warm cup of tea in hand, and she shared a reassuring sentiment. "It's normal to worry," she said, resting her head on my shoulder. "But remember, it's not about the cars or the crafts. It's about creating a space where they feel valued and supported, whether it's with paintbrushes or just by listening to their hopes. They'll remember the love, not just the projects." Her words resonated deep within me, and I realized she was right. These kids, Jenna and Max, were resilient and adaptive, just as life would need them to be. My role wasn't to guarantee a perfect scenario constantly but rather to be their constant support through life's uncertainties. As days turned to months, I witnessed their confidence blossom, not just in their abilities with mechanics but also in their schoolwork and friendships. They naturally began taking leadership roles among their classmates, eagerly engaging in school projects. Each time they tackled a new challenge, I felt a surge of pride that they might carry the values we cultivated through our weekend car projects into the rest of their lives, providing a sense of direction only strengthened by the love we built together. Reflecting on this journey, I found clarity in accepting my title as dad in their lives, embracing the role with open arms. As winter approached, and car maintenance became less frequent, we shifted our focus to indoor projects. Jigsaw puzzles and game nights filled the house with energy. The old car stood proudly outside, an emblem of our collective achievements and the dawning of a familial bond that felt everlasting. I often pondered the future but found comfort in knowing that our legacy would consist of more than material objects. It would be woven with the stories of resilience, compassion, and unwavering support that would carry us through any trials that lay ahead. Update: fast forward several years, and the old car became a treasured memento. Jenna and Max took it to prom with their friends, painted stars on the roof, and filled it with memories I knew would last them a lifetime. And as Rachel and I watched them drive off into the night, her hands securely clasped in mine, I felt overwhelming gratitude for every moment, good and bad, that had brought us here, a beautifully imperfect family, ready to face the world together, one adventure at a time. It's funny how something you think will be a dream come true can turn into a waking nightmare. That's how I felt the day after my wedding. My friend, Ella, was always the planner among us, organizing everything from birthday parties to community events, so when I got engaged, I couldn't imagine anyone but her by my side to help with the big day. We were close, with years of friendship behind us, so it felt natural to make her my wedding planner. She wanted to do it all pro bono, which seemed generous at the time. But the day itself? It was a beautiful blur of laughter, love, and simmering tension that crept in like mist. Everything had gone mostly according to plan, until I began noticing that her assistant, a whirlwind of energy named Jenna, was acting a little strangely. I brushed it off during the ceremony, attributing her quirky behavior to nerves. Maybe it was just the excitement of being part of a huge event that made her so jittery. However, as the night went on, I kept catching snippets of bizarre conversations and whispered comments. At one point, I overheard her loudly commenting on the decorations, suggesting they were too cheap and wouldn't even match a low-budget prom. My heart sank. My wedding was everything I dreamed of, and here was someone trashing my hard work and Ella's planning. Still, the night was joyful overall, filled with family, friends, and an overwhelming amount of love. However, my euphoria took a nosedive when I saw Jenna lurking near the bar, watching my cousin do a little dance, and behaving like she was secretly filming the moment on a phone. It felt invasive, and I couldn't shake the gut feeling that her behavior was crossing a line. I tried to brush it off, thinking perhaps I was too focused on my wedding to read too much into things, but every so often, I'd catch her tension with Ella, a look of disdain or perhaps jealousy. It was hard to tell. Some distant part of me wanted to confront her directly during the wedding, but I didn't want to ruin what was supposed to be my perfect day. As the wedding came to an end and the guests started to filter out, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I found Ella packing up some of her things and asked her a little hesitantly about Jenna. She brushed it off with a wave, assuring me that Jenna could be a handful but was a good worker. That was the last thing I wanted to hear. In that moment, I felt torn. Should I say something? Should I tell my friend how her assistant had been acting? I didn't want to seem petty or make Ella uncomfortable. After all, this was her friend too, and I didn't want to create unnecessary tension. Yet, the idea of keeping quiet festered within me like a slowly brewing storm. I ended up keeping my mouth shut, thinking it was best to focus on my new life as a married woman, burying the worry instead of voicing it to Ella. But as days turned into weeks, I found my heart growing heavier. I replayed those moments over and over in my mind, feeling guilty for not speaking up and questioning if I had added to the problem by being complicit. Maybe Ella deserved to know what kind of person her assistant was. In the end, I opted for honesty. I called up Ella one night, still hesitant yet resolute to share my feelings. I told her everything, the comments, the looks, and how I felt a little uncomfortable with some of Jenna's actions. There was a long pause on the other end before she finally spoke. To my surprise, she thanked me for my honesty, admitting she had sensed some strange behavior from Jenna too but hadn't fully acknowledged it. Ella even mentioned that she had been having her doubts about Jenna's professionalism well before the wedding. It was a relief to hear that I wasn't imagining it after all. That heavy weight felt lighter on my shoulders. Weeks later, Jenna was let go, and while it felt sad to see Ella lose a friend over a work-related matter, it was also a sense of closure for me, an acknowledgement that I wasn't just overreacting. We spent an evening reminiscing about the wedding, laughing over the little blunders, and what could have gone differently, realizing that even with the hiccups, the day was still beautiful. It also deepened our friendship, solidifying our bond in a way I hadn't anticipated. Ella realized that honesty might sometimes sting, but it's essential in truly maintaining a friendship. As I reflect on that day now, I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Opening my heart to Ella not only alleviated my guilt but also helped her in the long run, protecting her from an untrustworthy colleague. And, as for Jenna? Well, perhaps she was just overwhelmed with the excitement of the day. Maybe she was having personal issues that poured into her professional life. I'll never know, and the knowledge doesn't haunt me like it once did. Update: a few months passed, and I was thrilled to find out that Ella had found another assistant, one who was not only professional but actually shared the same values as her. It feels good to see her flourish in her work while also maintaining the beautiful friendship we have. Sometimes, doing the right thing might feel heavy, but it can lead you to unexpected places of warmth and understanding, and for that, I am thankful. As I settled into my routine after that tumultuous wedding, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed not just in my life, but in the lives of those around me. Ella's new assistant brought a fresh energy to her business, vibrant and eager, and it felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The first time I visited her office in the months following my wedding, it was as if I walked into a different world. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating tidily arranged mood boards and colorful swatches that seemed to dance with enthusiasm. Ella buzzed with excitement as she showed me new designs, her passion reignited, and I could tell this new assistant was a source of that spark. I remembered our late-night talks about the pressures of running a business while nurturing personal relationships. Ella had always been committed to both, but that balance hadn't always been easy for her. Now, she appeared genuinely happy, her laughter ringing through the room like music. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of relief that she had found someone who understood not just the business but also her heart. Then came the moment that rooted everything in perspective, a casual dinner with Ella, where the conversation veered from wedding planning to deeper topics of friendship, trust, and vulnerability. We chatted over steaming plates of pasta, and I couldn't resist sharing more about how I felt learning of the difficulties her former assistant faced. I didn't name names, but I told her how important it is to recognize our own limitations. Ella listened intently, nodding in agreement, and when I reflected on how my decision to not confront her about it felt like a burden lifted, a silence fell between us, contemplative and heavy with understanding. Sometimes, we have to be honest with ourselves before we can be honest with anyone else, she said, her tone soft but resolute. At that moment, it dawned on me that both of us were in a continual state of growth. Her journey in the wedding industry had paralleled mine in life. I saw in her eyes the acknowledgement of not just what she'd endured, but also the strength that refusal to judge could offer to another soul navigating their own battles. I felt grateful for the lessons learned and the bonds fortified through the trials. It felt almost magical how one challenge had united us more than ever. Even now, reflecting on that dinner, I am thankful for the open-hearted honesty we shared that evening, the kind that strengthened rather than strained a friendship. Life rolled on, and a few weeks later, I received an unexpected phone call from Ella. She excitedly shared that she had not only secured a deal with a major wedding magazine but had also been invited to speak at an upcoming bridal convention. This was the kind of exposure she had yearned for, a validation of her hard work, and I felt my heart swell with pride for her accomplishment. She asked if I could come along, to support her through what would surely be a whirlwind of networking and creativity. Of course, I said yes, and as I prepared to join her for this new adventure, I realized that sometimes opportunities arrive not just from talent but from resilience. Ella had influenced me to embrace the bumpy roads that come with life, recognizing that though our paths diverged at times, our shared experiences continued to weave us closer. The love stories we create, relationships strengthened in the wake of hardship, remind us of the beauty and vulnerability of revealing ourselves in the face of uncertainty. As I nestled into bed that night, my thoughts drifted like autumn leaves, floating softly on a gentle breeze of contentment. I was relieved to put distance between the noise of what could have festered into something unhealthy. Decisions made can weigh heavily, but those burdens oftentimes give way to understanding and growth. Gratitude filled the spaces where worry once resided, and I realized that I wouldn't change a moment of what led us here, not just for Ella or her new assistant, but for myself as well. This journey was our own, one where lessons lingered like sweet aftershocks of knowing one another's hearts, a tapestry that reminded me that at the end of the day, honest connections can indeed light the darkest of paths. As the busy season of weddings approached once again, I felt a sense of excitement ripple through me, like the gentle chime of bells heralding a season of joy. Ella and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm, often exchanging ideas over coffee, sometimes brainstorming themes for her upcoming clients, and more often than not, sharing the laughter that only friends can evoke. The experience of the past few months had instilled a deep appreciation in me, not just for Ella's talent, but for the kind of environment she cultivated, a safe space where creativity flowed freely without fear of judgment. Yet, somewhere beneath this warm connection, I felt the echoes of the past brush against my consciousness like a distant storm cloud. There was something unresolved that lingered, a loose thread that I had intentionally hoped to forget amidst all the good fortune that followed. One afternoon, as we sat across from one another in our favorite cafe, a quaint little place draped in soft sunlight, Ella shared the story of her new assistant, Mia. "You know," she started, a soft smile tinging her lips, "Mia is incredible. She brings such a fresh perspective and always shows up with these brilliant ideas." I could see the sparkle in her eyes, an unmistakable sign of her blossoming happiness, and I felt a swell of joy for her. But as she recounted the talents and quirks of her new partner, a subtle sense of guilt crept into my heart, mingling with the joy like shadows playing hide and seek. The shadow came from my own truth, the worry that I had once inhabited Ella's world with unnecessary honesty, one that had felt painful yet liberating at the time. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to push the weight of my past thoughts aside, focusing instead on the laughter-filled conversations we shared. But that guilt persisted, whispering in the recesses of my mind until it became a familiar companion. One evening at home, with a quiet rain drumming softly against my window, I found myself reviewing the events of my wedding day, desperately concerned with the idea of keeping the past hidden in the shadows. Maybe Mia was exactly what Ella needed. She deserved a supportive environment, free from past tumult. My heart wrestled with the dilemma: would I be the asshole for expressing my concern as a way of protecting her? I knew I couldn't carry this weight anymore without sharing. It felt almost like a betrayal not to mention it, especially considering how open our friendship had become. The next day, during our regular meet-up, I mustered my courage and broached the subject, carefully weighing my words. "Ella, can we talk about something a little sensitive?" She paused, her smile wavering slightly, and I felt the tension stretch between us. I took a breath, viewing our friendship as a brick wall I never wished to disrupt. "I need to tell you about your last assistant. What happened at my wedding?" It wasn't an easy confession, the words clung to my throat like fog, but another part of me, the part that knew the weight of honesty, pushed through. Ella listened intently, her eyes widening as I recounted the moments, The way her assistant's stress had flared that particular day, how it had transferred into her actions, the anxiety it cultivated. I spoke of the raw emotions, the purported things I'd seen slip into the undercurrents of that day. I was at once terrified and relieved, her silence pressing against me as I finished my tale. Her face softened into what I interpreted as a blend of surprise and contemplative understanding. "Thank you for telling me," she finally said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing behind her eyes. I had no clue. In that moment of vulnerability, I could see the bricks of mistrust begin to crumble, not just in her eyes, but within my own heart. Ella wasn't angry, she was grateful for the truth, understanding that honesty had the power to reshape her path, just as it had for me. Days passed, and we continued our friendship, but something felt lighter. Although Ella had faced discomfort upon learning the truth, it became a catalyst for her to engage in deeper conversations with Mia, ensuring they shared the same goals and values moving forward. I watched from the sideline as she addressed the situation with grace and assertiveness, flourishing in a new cohesion with her assistant. Eventually, I learned that sometimes, sharing our burdens can cultivate deeper trust, that connection can blossom in the spaces carved by honesty. It confirmed what I'd always known: sometimes, carrying a piece of the past into the light allows it to serve as a foundation for something new, illuminating paths once cloaked in shadows. What transpired brought forth more gratitude than I could ever have anticipated, for not only had I deepened my friendship with Ella, but I had also empowered her journey, a beautiful symbiosis of care and clarity where once lay uncertainty. As I reflect back on this intricate journey we're still navigating together, I see how the vulnerability stitched together our stories, binding us in ways I never would have predicted. The best part of this realm of friendship was knowing we stood beside each other, carrying the lessons of yesterday into a hopeful tomorrow, knowing that at the end of the day, it is the relationships we carefully tend to that create warmth and wisdom. Perfectly illustrated in the gentle hum of our interactions and the robust tapestry of our lives woven together. I never thought I would find myself in the midst of such chaos, but there I was, sitting on the edge of my bed before the door swung open and my best friend, Clara, rushed in, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and panic. It was a rainy Wednesday, the kind of day that makes you want to curl up with a book and forget the world outside, but today was different. Today marked 3 months since Clara's boyfriend, Ryan, had walked out, leaving her broken-hearted and desperate for answers that I had a sinking feeling she would never find. For years, I had stood by her through this tumultuous journey of love and heartache, but the truth was that I'd grown tired of her constant excuses, of the way she seemed to repeatedly brush aside her culpability in the relationship's unraveling to cling to her victim narrative. Ryan had been a good man, scrupulously faithful, but I'd watched the way Clara would flirt with him during parties, the subtle yet unmistakable invitations that would lead to late-night phone calls where she would complain about how distant he had become. I felt the weight of my own silence pressing down on me, which was why, on that rainy evening, when Clara burst into my room, I finally found the words I had been holding back for months. "Clara, can we talk?" I asked gently, hoping to soften the blow. As the words left my mouth, I felt a storm brewing within me. It was time to address the elephant in the room, no matter how much I dreaded what might unfold. Clara plopped herself onto my bed, a worn-out tear-streaked pillow held tightly against her chest as she anxiously ran her fingers through her tousled hair. "I just can't understand why he left, you know? I did everything for him," she lamented, her voice thick with helplessness. I looked into her eyes, swimming with confusion, and wondered how many times I had already fed her excuses, how many nights I had indulged her tales of woe without ever once saying what I really thought. "Maybe if you had just," I started, my voice betraying my hesitation, but she interrupted me with a wave of her hand. "What? If I had just what? Let him do whatever he wanted while I sat on the sidelines watching?" The accusation hung in the air like a heavy fog. It was then I understood I had to tread carefully. "Clara," I said slowly, choosing my words with as much care as I could. "I think if you hadn't always tried to get with him, maybe he wouldn't have left you." The moment the words spilled out, the tension crackled like electricity between us. Clara's expression morphed from hurt to outrage. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind as she struggled to process my blunt honesty. "How could you say that? You're my best friend. Aren't you supposed to support me?" I felt a wave of guilt wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by a lingering urge to defend my stance. I reminded myself that friendship sometimes required uncomfortable truths, sometimes it meant risking the bond for something more substantial. "I am supporting you, but it feels like you've never truly seen how your actions have affected your relationships. It's not just about what Ryan did, it's about us taking accountability too." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken words. Clara's gaze fell to her lap, and for a moment, I thought I'd lost her for good. It was then she looked back up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was a look of vulnerability that I had rarely seen. "Maybe you're right," she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. "Maybe I need to reevaluate how I treat the people I love." I felt an unexpected relief wash over me. Often, the hardest conversations turn out to be the most necessary. We spent the rest of the evening talking in quiet tones, not eliminating the possibility of her feelings but rather exploring them, digging into the roots of her behavior. Each shared memory seemed to stitch us back together, slowly mending the cracks that had begun to spread between us. Weeks passed, and as Clara began to explore some of her choices in therapy, I too found myself reflecting on our friendship. It became clear to me that I hadn't only been a friend to Clara, I had also held onto her anger to shield my own insecurities. I called Ryan one evening, just to check in, and surprisingly, he was open to talking. He spoke about how difficult the breakup had been for him, acknowledging the tension between the three of us. It was strange to see another person's hurt mirrored in my own thoughts. After all, hadn't all of this stemmed from a place of miscommunication? Maybe we all had a part to play in this tangled web. In the end, our friendships deepened but morphed into something new. Clara found solace in a different place of strength, and Ryan began to explore his own journey of healing. And me? I learned that sometimes addressing uncomfortable truths is a pathway to a better understanding of ourselves and the relationships we value the most. Months later, when I invited Clara to talk again, I could tell we were two friends who had survived a storm together. "You know," she said with a wistful smile. "That was a real turning point, wasn't it?" I nodded, feeling the warmth between us, the shared strength formed through honesty and confrontation, a bond that, while bruised, had somehow been made stronger. And maybe, just maybe, we would find our way back to laughter and light, as friendships are prone to do. I sat with her in that quiet moment, reflecting on how rain often gives way to the sun. The experience wasn't just about blame or regret, it was a hard lesson in growth, empathy, and the importance of holding each other accountable as we navigate this unpredictable thing called love. The silence lingered, comfortable yet heavy, as we both processed everything that had been said. I glanced out the window, noticing the rain had finally ceased. It felt like a metaphor for our turbulent conversation, a storm that had passed, leaving behind a kind of clarity. "You know," I said softly, breaking the quiet, "you might not want to hear this, but part of me is glad this happened." Her eyebrows furrowed in confusion, and I quickly added, "Not because of the pain, but because it forced us to confront the things we usually sweep under the rug." She turned to me, her expression softening as she nodded, a hint of understanding dancing in her eyes. We were two souls tangled in a web of relationships, me, the one who had tried to help her see where her actions were leading, and her, the one who had, perhaps unknowingly, steered her life into choppy waters. We spoke for hours, delving into her relationship with Jake, her boyfriend, and the heartache that had been crippling her since he left. I listened as she recounted the moments that led to their unraveling, the desperation to feel wanted battling against the impulses that drove her to seek affirmation in places it didn't belong. "Every time I thought about you and Tyler laughing together, it made me feel like I was missing something," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was an admission filled with vulnerable honesty that echoed in the quiet of my living room, sinking into the spaces where judgment had dissolved. As our conversation unfolded, I realized that not only was I trying to disentangle her from her own thoughts, but perhaps also from my lingering resentment over how her actions had affected my life. Eventually, the air shifted from confrontation to appreciation, as she thanked me for pushing her to see the reality of her choices. "You saved me from myself, you know that?" she said, her voice laced with gratitude. I felt a surge of warmth at her acknowledgement, a soothing balm on the wounds that had formed from the conflict. "Sometimes you need someone to be honest with you, even if it stings," I replied, wishing she understood how difficult it had been for me to say the words I had spoken. The evening wore on, and with every moment we shared, the shadows of our past began to recede, illuminating the path before us. On a whim, I suggested we consider starting a book club together, something that had been a long-standing joke between us. The idea was met with a laugh, and just like that, we transitioned from heavy-hearted discussions to playful banter about what books we might choose. It was a brilliant revelation, the whimsical notion of stories to share and discuss drawing us back into the familiar rhythm of our friendship, leaving our deeper troubles behind, if only for a moment. As the night wore on, I felt the worry of aftermath slowly lift, maybe the storm had truly passed. I turned off the lights, wrapping us both in the cozy familiarity of warm blankets and the faint scent of chamomile tea wafting through the air. It was in those shared breaths, wrapped in comfort, laughter, and the reverberating echoes of our goodbyes to hurt, that I finally dared to hope. Perhaps building back our friendship wouldn't just be a chore, but an adventure, one step at a time. After all, every story of conflict can lead to new beginnings. When I later wrote my post on the Ida thread, I framed it not just around the tumult of those moments but also around the evolution of our bond. It truly is a testament to how love, in all its forms, can ultimately rise from the very ashes of pain. And as I hit submit, I felt a wave of catharsis wash over me, a sense of closure for what had been. The comments that followed, filled with support and shared stories, became a living testament to the resilience of relationships, no matter how strained they may become. Hours later, as I finally drifted off to sleep, I clung to the thought that even the heaviest rainstorms make way for the brightest dawns, and perhaps this new dawn was the beginning of something beautiful for both of us. As I slipped into the soft embrace of sleep, my mind swirled with hopeful visions of the days to come, where laughter would find its way back into our conversations and the lingering shadows of doubt would fade into a distant memory. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, casting delicate patterns on the floor, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I awoke with a sense of peace that seemed to linger just outside my consciousness, waiting to be acknowledged. I reached for my phone, half expecting a cascade of notifications, but found only a solitary message from Sarah, my best friend. It read simply, "Can we talk?" I could sense the apprehension in those 3 words, a quiet echo of all the unsaid apologies hanging between us. While I was eager to engage, I also felt a tightening in my chest at the thought of another difficult conversation. What would I say? Did I even know how to approach it? Taking a deep breath, I replied with a tentative, "Of course, when and where?" We decided to meet at our favorite cafe, a small, cozy place adorned with whimsical decor and the intoxicating aroma of fresh pastries. Arriving a bit early, I perched on a low stool, my heart thudding in anticipation of what would unfold. When she walked in, she appeared almost ethereal, the sunlight catching the strands of her hair, framing her face like a soft halo. Yet, beneath that radiant exterior, I recognized the shadows of uncertainty etched in her expression. She slid into the seat across from me, and we exchanged hesitant smiles, as if testing the waters after a storm. "I'm really sorry," Sarah began, her voice shaky but sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how selfish I was, and I don't know how I let it get that far." I wanted to jump in, to assure her that we would be okay, but something inside urged me to let her voice her feelings first. "So," I nodded, prompting her to continue. "It's just, I guess I wanted what you had, without realizing the toll it would take on our friendship." "I know I hurt you," she said, her eyes glistening. There was pain in her words, a raw honesty that cut through the layers of our past. I felt something within me soften as I listened. It dawned on me just how much she had been struggling with her insecurities, having always looked up to the love I shared with my husband. "You were caught in a fantasy, just as I was," I replied softly. "It's hard to separate our desires from reality, and trust me, I've had my fair share of doubts. I thought things would always be perfect, but things change." We talked for hours, layers of misunderstanding peeled away like the soft petals of a spring blossom, revealing the roots of our friendship still intact beneath the surface. It felt refreshing to vent, to listen, and to empathize as we shared our past victories and losses, reinforcing how we had each found ourselves longing for something we had overlooked, the prioritization of our friendship over fleeting moments of jealousy or neglect. As time slipped by, I felt a sense of healing course through me. It wasn't just about reconciling our pasts but also about understanding the deeper roots of our connection. By the time we reached the end of our coffee, I felt as if we had created a new layer in our bond, more resilient than before. "So, what now?" I asked as we gathered our things, feeling light. "I think we should take it slow, just focus on being us again," she mused. "Let's just hang out, like we used to without any complications." I grinned, surprised at the weight that had lifted between us. We had learned a hard lesson together, one I hoped would keep us stronger and more connected moving forward. In the days that followed, we slowly began to rebuild our friendship. We went for runs by the river, where we laughed until our sides hurt, cooking together on the weekends, and even picking out movies to binge on lazy afternoons. Each gathering felt therapeutic, stitching together the frayed edges of our lives. I also saw how she began to take a step back from seeking validation in the attention of others and focused more on nourishing her self-worth. It was inspiring, and I felt grateful to witness her growth. Pain, it turned out, was not the end of our journeys but merely a pit stop on the way to something extraordinary. And with each passing day, the sunlight grew brighter, reminding me of how our lives could soften and reshape after a heavy rainstorm. As for my marriage, that too started to flourish. My husband had come to understand the weight of the situation, and we worked on cultivating stronger communication, prioritizing our bond in a way that honored its foundation. Perhaps we were all just learning how to navigate the complexities of love, friendship, and desire, an ongoing journey where every misstep could lead to enlightening perspectives. The day came when I found myself pouring out my heart again in another Reddit post, this time sharing the beautiful progress we had made, casting a brighter light on the lessons of accountability and unconditional support. We're all flawed, I wrote, but embracing each other's flaws can lead to something even more beautiful. It was cathartic, feeling the words tumble out freely, no longer burdened by resentment but buoyed by hope. As I hit submit, I looked out the window at the dawn breaking over the horizon, the colors blending seamlessly together, and for a moment, it felt like I was standing at the brink of an adventure, one built on healing and sincerity. What followed was a stream of encouraging comments and heartfelt messages from fellow Redditors who had experienced their own journeys of reconciliation, and they reminded me that the most difficult paths can lead to unexpected destinations, the small moments of joy, the laughter shared over coffee, and the deepening of true friendship. Just as I had hoped, the rain had brought forth a new dawn, and now, with each gentle wave of connection that rolled in, I understood that sometimes, the darkest storms create the most stunning landscapes.